Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on the 5th of April 2020. Now this will be probably a long talk, and so I should remember right now to remind you that you can donate to me at cuttingthroughthematrix.com. You'll see how to do it through PayPal, or even send cash or send checks, and it tells you how to get them to me. And remember too that right now with all this pandemonium, let's put it that way, this managed and promoted pandemonium that we're living through right now, that most businesses are in a lockdown too, and so you have to wait. If you order books, for instance, you have to wait until I can get the printers to get them done, because they're pretty well in lockdown as well through all this crisis, and well, the whole country is, isn't it? So it might take a little while, but it'll get to you eventually once they get printed. Don't worry about it. So you can order at cuttingthroughthematrix.com, remember, and you'll also see an address there if you want to post something to me, and how to do it. And if you can't find that, just email me, and you can find out how to do that too at cuttingthroughthematrix.com, and how to get in touch if you're confused about anything at all. And I'll get back to you as soon as I can. But yeah, you can donate to me, and that helps me tick along. And I've got expenses here naturally, and my equipment's really old. All of it. It's very simple, but it's still expensive to me. That is, at my level of income. So you can help me tick along, as I say, by sending a few bucks this way as well. And you got to remember too that all the big talk show guys out there use my archives all the time and never mention me whatsoever, because I've been putting out stuff since the 90s in detail, and believe you me, those archives are heavily used by pretty well everybody you hear out there on the radio. So anyway, I'll get back to the talk now. Hope you're all doing okay under these incredible circumstances, and what a time it is to be, I don't say alive anymore, I just say existing. We're existing in a form of under lock and key pretty well across a good part of the globe. I'm pretty certain too, like most big things that happen in the world, we're living through a time where things are not just happening as we stumble down through time, but there's a lot of planning goes into everything, of course. What it does show you under this particular period of time is the global management of this whole system, which really is quite interesting, because as I've talked before in the past about how stars are made from scientists and even historians now, they make sure you follow them all, and you've got Neil Ferguson, who has his who's a guy that's often quoted by governments for his predictions, basically, supposedly of what's going to happen with most things in life, according to the past histories and so on. And yet it's to do also with computer modeling. Very important. Because I was thinking about that just before I came on, and everywhere you look, even whereas Toronto or the States or other countries in Europe, and China too, they're using computer models to predict the future. It's quite fascinating, really, to realize that the talks they gave back in the 90s are all really coming true, to do with a religion. As they take religion out of the picture, they really replace it with a new religion, because that's what people seek. Religion, they seek answers to things which frighten them, or they can't understand, or the fact too that we're living and we die, and most folk don't like that. And the ones at the very top really don't like it, because they love living. They enjoy it more than anybody else, because they get the best treatment for everything. They even have life extension and that's quite open actually, at very high circles. And even with talks they give in certain countries, they've got a spare $7 million or more. They can keep you alive till 140 if you so wish. So we're living in amazing times, as the elites go all out to make sure that they keep living forever, as long as they possibly can. Because life's pretty wonderful when you get up in the morning and you really don't have a care in the world. It's what most folk can't understand, literally not having a care in the world. People who are brought up with butlers and servants and so on, from childhood, where even their clothing is laid out in the bed for them, and they're helped to get dressed. They sail through life. They don't get up thinking about bills to pay, because it's all taken care of by managers and estate managers and so on that deal with all of that. And they get into their chauffeur-driven cars, and they have no idea, and they care less to know when it was serviced or just out of the garage, and the other one was getting used in the meantime. They have none of that. They don't even know how where the oil goes. They probably don't even know if there's oil in it or what it's for. These things are literally unimportant. It's all taken care of by other people, little people. That's what they call the little people. And they love life. They really, really love life, because it's so wonderful to them, and they have the best medical care that the money can possibly buy. And they don't even worry mainly at the top here about cancers anymore, because they have the stem cell projects underway. They're really old projects going back to the 1970s, but only now they're allowing people down the totem pole, if you've got the cash to actually get in on it and get certain cures. But they've been using that since at least the 70s, maybe the 1960s, for the wealthy elite already, which means they're onto something even further when they allow that level to be sold to the public. So we're living through amazing times, as I say, where we're being told by our masters, really, to be absolutely terrified. And there's so many things you have to notice about it all, really. For years now, especially since the Leveson inquiry in Britain, the Lord, who basically was given the task to censor all journalism in the UK. Australia followed suit with their own clone version of this particular judge, and they passed pretty well the same things, where suddenly journalism became flat, more flat than it had been for a long time. It's always been rather controlled, rather very controlled, in fact. Any journalist knows where his bread and butter comes from, and he knows that if he wants to get the jam on top, his paycheck, he's got to play the game according to his master. And they don't have to, most folk in the world don't have to be told what and what not to do in their jobs. Again, it's like osmosis. Again, you learn through osmosis. You catch on rather quickly. And there's certain smiles as things are said, and knowing smiles, and you give knowing smiles back because you say, I understand, and that's how things really work. So you have to be complicit in what you've agreed to, even though it's never verbally spoken directly. And that's how things really are in this world in which we live. But after that so-called inquiry, and they came out with the laws and so on, journalism became even flatter than it had been for an awful long time. And so for quite a few years now, and I've given many talks on it, people had tuned out. And they all knew it. People were on the internet and so on. But people had tuned out of regular media. It was so flat and unresponsive and boring and repetitive, and it wouldn't tackle any important subjects, which were obviously people were well aware of. Things were happening, but they wouldn't report on it so they were completely ignored and discredited big time. But you understand that happened as well. Even in 2001, that went flatter then too, as the big lies took place, the noble lies to conquer the world and all that, or conquer their enemies. And they call it the noble lie, that enemies living in caves did it all, and stuff like that. And so you have to go along with the noble lie. So the greater good, you see. And they talked about the need for the noble lie. And they put it into university talks and everything else too, for up and coming people who would be part of the future media that's now in the flat response time that we're in today. So anyway, you've watched it going downhill and down the hill and down the hill. It was always biased, of course. You had literally black and white newspapers. That you always had the left wing and the right wing. And even their symbology is quite fascinating. And their terminology for what they call themselves. Very, very telling in the so-called Masonic circles as they play the game, But really, they had lost all credibility very rapidly since 2001. It really escalated up until, let's say, the inquiries in Britain. and the laws were getting passed and all that. And then the rest of the world has followed suit. And since then, it was just dead flat and boring. And they kept giving you heaps and bucketfuls of trivia and celebrities that replaced what used to be called news. And eventually, people will start to think it is news, But it's not. News is not something to do with personal lives of the rich and famous, regardless how, temporary they might be, but in celebrity status. But that's what they replaced it all with. And we've all lived through this. It's so completely disregarded. They're losing money. They had their hands out everywhere. They tried every gimmick in the electronic systems of the internet to try and get people to subscribe and pay for the news that they would give you and so on. And often even what they give you now is still commentary, and very weak and very politically correct commentary at that. So it doesn't have the credence it used to have a long time ago. Do you realize that literally almost overnight, with this hype about, oh my God, we're all going to die, you're all going to die, the big horror story, mass hysteria was created. And I've given talks many, many years ago, and not so long ago again, about how horror stories work. And it's to do with the limbic part of your brain, the so-called primitive part too, that has all the different functions in it for survival, and all the basically that uninhibited part of you that has to survive at all costs. And it's not really a thought-through process. You just do it, and it happens. And the fight or flight and so on syndrome that kicks in too. And that's why you watched movies, especially horror movies that are pretty bad. I've watched lots of horror movies that are awfully bad. Some of the old ones compared to what they're putting out today are virtually classics, with fantastic acting compared to what they put out today. But anyway, that's a different story. Yeah, I'm talking about even the old B's and C's and so on. At least they weren't cussing and swearing every sentence and etc. But anyway, the reason you watch these horror stories is because you are, and I've said before many times when I've talked about this subject, you're in the position, the person who's getting chased or hunted or going to get eaten or whatever it happens to be, and you project yourself there, and with every turn and twist as you're getting chased or whatever it happens to be, or getting set up to be killed or whatever, you're on almost on high alert, like the person in the movie. You project yourself into them, and that's why you watch them, even when it's bad. And if you turn your eyes away for a second, you see, this is awfully important. That's the moment you might find out, if you hadn't seen what was going to happen, or the movement of this creature, or whatever it was going to eat you, you might get eaten, you see. So your mind is attuned for pure survival, and you've got to be incredibly wide awake to watch it all and see it all, so you can deal with it in case it happens to you, see. And that's why you watch it, no matter how bad it really is. Some of the things, mind you, are so bad today, you might just want to die anyway. It really is so bad, some of these movies. I often wonder if that's what they're meant to do, is just kill you off out of boredom. But the old ones are pretty decent, really. Even when they had little rubbery figures, they were supposed to be monsters and stuff, it was quite good, because they were enthusiastic the way they projected across to the public. You kind of had to get into the Shakespearean type mood of it all, where the audience would participate in a sense in the actual play. But it worked out okay. So you get fight or flight, as I say, for pure survival. And that's what you watch. Well, that's what you're getting today. And that's what the media's resurgence, an overnight resurgence out of years, almost a decade, more than a decade of complete mediocrity. Overnight, through a terrorist, I think, event, you see, suddenly the whole planet is tuning in case they miss something that might save their lives. And all they're doing is getting terrified to make sure they keep watching one after the other, the next expert, and they're all contradictory, of course, as they all vie for stardom, the different Dr. So-and-so and Dr. So-and-so and Dr. So-and-so, etc., etc. And they all vie for the stardom, you see. It's interesting to really study humanity in these times, as we're being all studied incredibly minutely at the moment. It's astonishing to see them all come forth, and all the egos clashing and so on. But getting back to what we're talking about, and how the media's made this massive resurgence, just out of pure fear and terror and all the rest of it. And they don't have to even look for any, they weren't even born to look for news before, mind you. But now it's even better because all you do, this give you doctors giving you terror events every day, you know. Oh, your eyeballs might fall out, or, you know, if you suspect a symptom, make sure you phone in. Things like that. And, of course, the agenda for sustainability this is all what you're living through. Agenda 21's here, folks. This is it. As I've said before, at the last climate meeting, and I read the articles and the speeches they gave, that the public weren't listening to them. And the whole point of the climate thing was depopulate the world. There's too many people, you give off carbon. That's the excuse they used, was the climate, you see. Before that, they had other excuses for it, including global cooling, but still too many people. It's always the same thing, because the real thing they're getting at is there's too many of you, and we want to depopulate you. It goes all the way back to before even the 20th century started, all the organizations that were on board with this. So here they are, fulfilling it all. You see, they said at that meeting that people were not listening to them, they weren't obeying them and consuming less and all the rest of it. They'd already got you into a post-consumerist society, post-industrial type society, as some of their heroes of the left. They're really the heroes of the ultra rich at the top, like Maurice Strong, who was picked up by Rockefeller, groomed by him, and put in charge of oil fields to learn the trade. That's how they do it, folks, you know. And then they set him out there as supposedly this kind of strange international socialist type character who is in charge of all the climate, and he's in charge of consumerism and anti-consumerism and sustainability and biodiversity, etc., etc., etc. I made into a star by the machine again too. But Maurice Strong said the same thing, that by the time we were finished, when he was asked at one of his big meetings after I think it was a Rio summit, and it's a famous paper put out on his speeches they gave, and a person who was there at the time asked him, who stood in for his son. His son had got ill or died, I think, and so the dad went up and to attend the meeting, and he talked to Maurice Strong, and he broadcast what happened at the conversation on the international radio at the time. And he's talking about what you were just talking about, he says to Maurice. He says, you're talking about giving rights to animals and trees and everything else. And he says, but what about the people, you know? And Maurice Strong said to him, he says, when we were finished, he says, you wish you had the same rights as a tree. This is not a people-friendly organization that Maurice Strong, he was a front man for the ultra rich. You understand? A complete frontman, and ruthless with it too. So you've got to understand what you're dealing with here. And this agenda here has been rammed through everything that they couldn't get through the sustainability agreements and the Millennium Projects and all the rest of it to reduce population and consumers. And Maurice Strong, remember, also said that we must destroy and just completely dismantle all progress the West made in industry. That's what he said. To bring into a pre-industrial society. Well, pre-industrial, it was not a healthy place for most folk. Folk died quite often with colds and things and influenzas all the time because they were so unhealthy, and they were starved. Most folk were bulk starved basically, and malnourished in places like Europe, different countries, especially Britain, that never looked after its working people. So yeah, we're dealing with an agenda here getting rammed through. Now it's under the guise of, we're all going to die if we don't just give up all your rights, stop working completely, don't obey immediately every order you're given by authorities of all kinds. And by the way, you've yet to see all the different authority agencies are bringing forward. I mentioned commissars years ago, what will be in your area. Well, they're bringing them out now as they recruit them all in different areas across Europe and Britain especially, again, and Australia and New Zealand and Canada, and they will be your local commissars. That's who you'll go to with any grievances, like you're starving, you know, because you can't get food or anything like that. They've got all these kind of things arranged, and a lot of, even the States too, they set them up too for disasters, etc. after 9/11, and you had ex-military people, anybody who'd done any kind of service, could volunteer for the same kind of projects. Well, now you've got them, and they're snooping them on their neighbours in some countries and phoning the cops, Because in some countries now, you're not only allowed maybe one short, like in Britain, I'll put a link up to a YouTube where a fellow's out there with his camera and he's looking at these empty streets and two huge, these strange Doctor Who looking police vehicles they have now in Britain, these bright yellow and green things, all striped. And one of them stops because he's basically out there with a camera. And the man, you hear the cop saying to him, "Are we?" Because this is authorised in Britain. And the cop says to him, "Are you out for your short one walk per day, sir?" That's what you're allowed. One short walk per day. Now, how short is a short walk? I'm not sure. And I guess the cops are relishing this kind of power they've got, and they are actually. If they think you're out for too long, you're going to get a fine down the road. They're talking about fining you next if you won't run back from your short walk. Your one short walk per day. It's out of sight and out of control. I'll even put another one up too with Nigel Farage, who is doing it from his home, like everybody else, but he talks about it too. This lockdown is like because what's happening now, you're now a prisoner, you understand, and the police are your wardens, your prison wardens. And it's going to get a lot worse than this because they're going to extend it as long as they can possibly extend this big movement to save us all. And so, again, I'll just go back to a talk I gave years ago too, when I was talking about the Green Party in Britain. A long history of it, and I won't go into the beginnings of it, but they're quite fascinating themselves. But it was a leader of the British Green Party, or one of the leaders. The other one's quite interesting too. But the woman who was in charge, the spokesperson at the time for the party a few years back, maybe 10 years even, I don't know. She said that she had nostalgia for the way it was in World War II, when you're getting bombed from Germany and everybody was rationed. And everybody had to go into, people in London had to go into the underground, and they'd have these party songs. That's how they projected in old movies. Of course, it was miserable in reality. But she says that was wonderful. And the people all pulled together, and they didn't complain about authority and the authoritarian system because it was wartime, and they all had to pull together to get through, and they didn't complain about rationing and all the rest of it. This is what she hoped to bring into Britain. That kind of obedience, you see. And you just quietly suffer things like starvation. But she thought it was wonderful. Well, here you go. What do you think this is all going to lead to? What do you think it's going to lead to? And I'm not kidding you. I'm not playing down what's going on at all with the actual virus. But the way it's getting played by those in authority it's really interesting. And where it's supposed to go is even more interesting, because obviously there's going to be no economy after this. I hope you understand that. It's meant to destroy. It's back to Maurice Strong, that whatever economy was left, completely destroy it. And that's how they're going to achieve a lot of their goals, obviously. And you might have eventually your little local commissar will decide how much food you get for the week. And so on, you know. And if you think that you're looking a bit heavy, they might just cut it back a bit. You think I'm kidding, eh? You wait and see. These are the times when you'll see the real control freaks coming forward rather openly. They already are, a lot of them. And the longer they can pull this off, the more confident they feel to really push it further. That's how control freaks work, you see. And we don't have to go through the history of the world to see how it's worked in previous times. If you look at the incredible experiments they've done down through time, in France, especially with the French Revolution, and then you see the big experiment too with the Bolshevik Revolution, and the mass slaughter of the people, what they called excess, or the middle classes, but really a lot of them were not the middle class. So you're killed for your point of view, because control freaks have no tolerance for any other point of view. Whatever title they give themselves, like liberal or left-wing or whatever, or a socialist even. Because don't forget, the Russia was a union of Soviet Socialist Republic. You know? So you have to remember what we're going through. And during the entire communist era, and especially Canada and the States vied every year to sell them the grain. It was big, booming business. And they decimated their farmers too. In the Ukraine, millions of them, 6 or 7 million of them were killed, starved to death. Great old videos and photographs of the people. But the horror that you actually see, and by great I mean that a lot of documentation was taken. And because the Soviets thought, or the Bolsheviks thought that they were, well, you couldn't trust these people because they're real peasants. It's supposed to be a workers' revolution, but the peasants were hated by the folk who really ruled them. Utterly hated. And so they even took their farming implements away too, guaranteeing it's total starvation. And I hope you understand there's people who look back at that era and have the same personality as the commissars would go around and do all that. I get fed up when I hear people, all they talk about is Hitler. Like there's the only person in history, right, who went on a rampage of war. Well, what happened about Napoleon? Huh? What about the Soviet Union that spread its empire under the Soviet bloc? What am I saying here? Go down through time, and in every generation you've got the high level tyrants with incredible, dreams of dominating everybody. And that doesn't stop. It didn't just switch off after World War II. Every country has them. Most of them never get up there to command nations, but sometimes they do. And in times like this, you've got to be so careful, because it doesn't mean that they even have the brains of previous tyrants, you see. But they have that spark in where they want to dominate other people. There's a sadistic streak in those who decide that they know how you should be living. Incredibly sadistic. In fact, they hate you, I think. I think it's part of it. It's a sadistic, psychopathic system where a psychopath, as we know, will give complete allegiance to the officer above them, a rank above them, and complete contempt and arrogant nastiness to the people beneath them, including the next commission down, basically. That's how they are. That's how they really, really are. And it doesn't stop through time, like, somehow you're evolving. No, it's the same characters, same types of characters. I'm sure we've all met them in different occupations that people have had in their lives. So you meet them. You meet them at school even. And it is quite astonishing to talk to them. Sometimes they can be awfully honest with you. Psychopaths can be awfully honest at times. If they can't get something from you, or they don't want something you'll be surprised how honest they can be. And if they conquer, or are caught conquering through even the ones who end up in prison, because that's what they're really doing when they do whatever it is they pull off, it's a form of conquering. And they beat somebody. It's a one-upmanship thing. And they have tremendous egos. They are almost pure ego, a psychopath. The cleverer ones can hide it to a good extent and use it and excel in business and become utter tyrants in the business field. Ruthless too. But we've all met them, as I've said before. And I met one once years ago, of a fellow who'd come up to Scotland, and he told me one day, quite openly and honestly, he said, and I'd beat him in all exams, and he said, he was quite open and honest. He said, with a real puzzled expression, he says, I said, I had no idea. He says that the education system was what trained Scots to be better. I said, what do you mean better? He says, I was top of everything when he was in England. And the reason he came to Scotland was he thought he'd achieve even better and higher results in exams, final exams, all different things, by coming to Scotland, where he had thought we were inferior. And he wasn't being nasty about when he was saying this. It was like a dilemma he was trying to figure out, you see. That's what it was to him. It was just a dilemma. And he had those same traits, the psychopathic type traits. And that's how they are. But they can be, as I say, awfully honest at certain times when they can't get something for you or get something over on you. They can be very, very honest. When they're caught, the ones who get caught end up in prison by doing something illegal or whatever, they love to boast. They'll suddenly come out with what they've done because it was so clever. And aren't you really amused and impressed by what they've done? You know? But we're run by that type, and they do seek power, and that's the problem with all power. They tend to rise, even police commissioners and so on too. They rise to that kind of level of power. And believe you me, if you wonder why political correctness rampages through the police world, apart from the training that they get too, to always be, look out for this and look out for that, or bad, or even hate stuff, you know. Don't forget that once you have something on the books, and have their little courses taken, then they can start arbitrarily judging people for what they say or think. And I'll put up another clip today of a person in Britain. It was an inquiry with a police commissioner, or the deputy police commissioner of London, I think it was, because his force now are literally giving visits to people or phoning them up according to their tweets and Twitters or likes and dislikes and all that. I'm not kidding you. You're so well studied. And they're phoning people up and put them on hate lists just for making them a joke. And that's for life, folks. That's for life. And so this police commissioner or deputy, you'll see him prevaricate and dance around the questions all the time because he himself has psychopathic qualities and tendencies. And obviously no humanity, because any decent person would know it's wrong to put somebody down on it's not a crime, by the way, for what you think. It's not a crime. But it is thought crime now, you see. And characters like this deputy police climb to the top by going along with every PC thing that was in vogue at the moment. And these are the kind who end up being utter tyrants when you get into a Soviet-type system of authority, over an arbitrary authority over the public. I'm not kidding you. You better look at these things and think about them because they're out there. People who literally hold on to humanity and, oh, that's terrible, that's wrong, all right. They don't get the promotions. It's the lickers, as you well know. We'll call it bootlickers if you like. But these are the characters who get up to the top. And they have no problem with the fallout it causes on society as they go on the rampages and get little more brownie points for their career, for finding more focus. Did you know what so-and-so said? Do you know what their opinion is? Boomf, you know, a record for life by them, not even going through a judge or anything else, or a jury, or, We're here, folks. Honestly, we're here. We already had countless articles from science magazines and so on over many, many years, and business magazines too, for those who read them, and stacks and thousands of articles about what they'd like to do with say, digital technology, and where they'd like to take the world and have the biometrics for everybody, and even the health organizations too, and the big industries of pharmacology, incredible massive businesses, and the vaccine industries too, who are talking about what they'd love to have, and then look at the people at the CDC who are in and out of big pharma all the time on the boards and back into the CDC. It's like I did articles many years ago with the names of the people on the boards and so on who literally came from the top jobs in pharmacology and the big corporations and into the CDC, and then they're pushed to have certain bills. The same, the FDA was exactly the same. And once they get bills passed, they promote bills and politics and so on, and they go back into the CDC again or whatever it happened to be. That's how it really is, folks. Everything is so tightly woven with the conflict of interest, corporations and politicians and so on. You can't disentangle it anymore. You'd have to literally clean out the house and start again, because everything is so. I mean, every country is the same. Every country is exactly. I can remember when Canada was going. Oh, we're going to have the deregulated, patent deregulated drugs, and the older type drugs, generic drugs in Canada, And we all think, wow, God, isn't that wonderful? Thank God, because folk couldn't afford the medications, you know. And then you find out one or two groups or even families end up getting the contracts for so much of it. And before you know it, they're almost the sole contractors for it all. In fact, they are. And including all the different opiate drugs. That's how that happened as well, by the way. And the prices are through the roof, you see. People who want to get rich don't wish about it. They do it. And they're very busy. And again, the psychopathic tendencies of them. They're not shy about coming forward, as they say, to get it done, get the job done. And they'll call you up and say, you know, you have a corporation, blah, blah, blah. And, I'd like you to do this for me, and I'll do that for you. And they're quite blatant. And even when it comes to touching on any kind of illegal activity with it, they'll find ways around it. And there's many ways to reward people that are in politics that keeps things off the books. I'm not saying anything new here. It's the way it all runs, in fact. When you look at any of them who start off and you see their salary, which is always too big anyway for what they really do, and politics happens to, but then you see what they've got in 5 or 10 years' time, all the billions and their millions. They didn't get that from their paychecks. We all know it, don't we? We all know it. And that's the way it really is. They get their gifts and presents and roundabout ways of getting things to them, and generally it's skipped over by any authorities and so on, as long as it's not too excessively obvious. And even when it is excessively obvious, like the Bidens, you know, the son of the Bidens and all that, and immediately, because so many of them are involved in the same kind of what we call corruption from the bottom level, that's how we see it. You get massive attacks by the whole, like, political parties now, if you notice it. It's just so corrupt, isn't it? Everything really is corrupt, everywhere you look. The same thing in Britain. As growing up, I noticed it. All the different lords that were up in the House of Lords, especially, and a lot of the top politicians in the House of Commons, they were involved in defence during the Cold War. It was booming business, where they'd help to push for the contracts for the big companies that made the missiles, especially. And tanks, of course, naturally, and submarines, big business for submarines, nuclear submarines. But they keep pushing for new missiles and anti-missile missiles, and all the rest of it, until literally you couldn't even follow it anymore. It was so complex with the Russians have the latest blah, 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 and ours is, 5 kilometers slower, so we couldn't reach it to knock it out. So we needed another missile. And then you have missiles, and it went on and on and on, into this ridiculous game of making missiles and massive contracts for expensive things, which really would never be used. You couldn't even test them to make sure they'd even work. A lot of them, if they're nuclear, you can't really test them, right? So you take it for granted that these are the things that they said there. But the shares that the big boys had in it, that were in the political parties, were enormous shares. And it was a great game. They really cried their eyes out when the Cold War supposedly ended, and because it came to an end. They never had it so good, never really. And the weapons wouldn't last that long. We had to dismantle them. They're obsolete now, but the ones today are faster. The ones from last year are just too slow. So a constant making new ones. And I don't know if you ever saw any of the good propaganda documentaries put out by the CIA, for instance, or the Department of Defense. All countries have them, and they showed you these big minaret towers they have in some of the Islamic countries, and they all have them really, and that's where they sing their prayers from and so on in the morning and different times of the day. But they said, this is the latest one we've noticed, and they'd pick a Soviet bloc country. And they said, look at that, inside there, we know they've got up, and they reel off this long, SFX, blah, 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 missile built in there. It was straight out of Mouse on the Moon, the old comedy movie, straight out of that. But they actually used that, and that was taught for like 25 years to every recruitment group that came in. in intelligence and showed, look at that, see that, what inside data is definitely a, and they did it for different ones too. And so we need another X blah, 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 anti-missile to find it and kill it and destroy it. See? Great business, great business, isn't it? And when it's done with governments, then, and this is the beauty of the banking system. Britain started it off with the Bank of England, and then they could lend to government, you see, for its projects, and they put down the people as the guarantors to pay it all back. That's beautiful, really, eh? And then the state followed suit with its Federal Reserve for World War I, to get into that. And then the taxpayers are put down, and income tax comes in, all the rest of it, to pay it off, etc. It's quite an amazing racket we live in, isn't it? And then you find out your governments are like semi-bankers, because after end of World War II, they'd already set up this economic development corporation, they call it. Every country had a set up to do it, Overseas Economic Development Corporation. And they'd appoint politicians in charge of it, you know. And they would lend your money across the planet, supposedly to help bring the third world countries up to standard, and they put factories in, or they build factories and that for them. Wherever the work was cheapest, they used this money for the labour. They built the factories and all that. And then they used the taxpayers back home. As they cut their jobs back, there's no factories left in your own country. They made you pay for it all. It's a complete racket. Complete racket. And if the labour got too expensive in one country, they simply uprooted and built another factory using your tax money again, and the borrowing from the central bank to build it somewhere. And then your bank, you see, your bank, your government starts ending up like a bank. Your government ends up like a bank as well. It's lending out to countries now. Well, where did they sneak that one in? They're electing a government so as they can lend money out, or even give it away to other countries without asking the people. Well, that's how governments actually work. It's got nothing to do with democracy. They're hoping that nobody's going to bother asking the right questions. And of course, the ones who pretend that they're left-wing are not going to rake the muck up either and say, well, we don't agree in you're giving your tax money away to other countries. And they'll never say that, will they? Which tells you a lot in itself. If they're all for fairness, now why should the people constantly pay money out so that your government can supposedly give it away or lend it out to certain countries, knowing they can never pay it back? And then they have movements going back in the country that's the guarantor to make you think that, oh yeah, it's a nice thing, it's a charitable thing to write off. Well, it's not written off. You're now paying for it. The guarantors, the citizenry of the country that lent it, are now the guarantors to pay it off. And as soon as you tear it up and pay it off, your government immediately gives them another loan. It's a complete financial racket by con men. That's how it is. And they use the left wing too. Oh, it's good to write off the debts. Well, it's not written off. We're still paying them. We pay them, you see. Never-ending racketeering, really. And that's how the world really works, because it's not Disneyland. It's not a happy little place with nice, clean little middle-class streets and everybody on bicycles and everybody knows everybody else. And so it's really pretty nasty at times. And the characters that run the world tend to be of much the same ilk. And if they have the right qualities of psychopathy, it doesn't matter if they're right-wing, left-wing, or what they happen to be, they're recruited by organizations. Because if they're psychopathic and they've got a bit of brains in them, they can be useful, awfully useful to those that run the world. That's how they recruit them. It's like the civil service. Most of the civil service, in most countries that I know of, the people don't even go through into universities. They're often recruited right from high school. And that is their apprenticeship, is once they get in at the bottom level. And they're there for life, That's their jobs for life. They know what they have to do, and they're well rewarded for doing it, well rewarded. And they're often intergenerational. They marry each other, a lot of them. And that's because they don't have to have resumes put in. Their parents are their resume, and their grandparents. They're like lineage, they're generations of bureaucrats and civil. That's what George Orwell, or Blair, and his real name was Blair. That's where he came from. So the real world is really, it's the machinations of real deceit and conning and pretense. And we who are being fooled have to participate in our own deception by deciding to ignore it, you see. And pretending that, oh, well, you know, it's not that bad, is it? Or really, this whole idea of having a democratic system, which of course they've scoffed at for years at the top, is it's a nice you know, myth, basically. It's a kind of a myth of the past, and it's and again, it's a utopic vision of a future that you're always working towards. You suffer now, so it's like down the road they're going to like it. Well, most folk, I think, today are pretty sick of looking to the future. They want it now, you see. And each time you start to see a glimmer of things getting a bit better for you financially, you're dashed again with either another bank crash with chronology, or the dollar is just completely devalued anyway, or your currency, whatever it happens to be, completely devalued by the ones at the top. You never meet. I mean, I'd rather vote for the folk the folk who really do things. Most of them you don't even know their names. They do exist, but they don't run for politics. They really don't. You might not understand this, but the big movements in your governments of the Western and Australia too, and New Zealand, the big movements that change your system don't come, the big moves don't come from the ordinary people or the politicians for that matter. The politicians might rubber stamp them because they know how they get a clue how the system really works, and it's not to ask questions when you get the nod or the wink, as they say. But when it comes to big things, like, for instance, free trade and the policies to do with all free trade, which are binding policies to unite the planet under a financial system, a political type system. We've been through this before many times in my talks with free trade and the Royal Institute for International Affairs, the CFR in Americas. They have one again for Europe now, the European Council on Foreign Relations, and they have one for the Far East. And the heads are based in Japan for that, or were anyway. But they also have ones in China now, in the communist China. And as Carl Quigley said, who did their history, because they have their own archives of how the world really has changed. And he wrote his book, Tragedy and Hope, because he said, because they're so important in the development of where the world's come from and where it's going, because they create the history. Not the one they give to us at school, but because they really make all the changes for globalism and for uniting the world into free trade blocks and for central banking systems and the World Bank and the IMF. They created all of this private organization. And it says time that the public knew about it, and he didn't think the public would object. So yeah, the free trade deals, including the old NAFTA deal, the USMCA deal, same thing, was drafted up by members of the Council on Foreign Relations. Some inside politics, a lot outside politics, but most of them you've never heard of. And they also drafted up the ones for the European amalgamation, for the European Union years ago. Private body of an organization. The name is most folk I'd never heard of. And they always get a front politician, you push it through. But the ones who really plan it all and do it all are never running for election on anything. They're appointed into a cabinet or over a house or a cabinet or a department, and that's how it's done. The free trade for the NAFTA deal for Canada was an outside appointment. The man was put in, Simon Reisman, who looked over the affairs of the preordained affairs of Canada. Canadians didn't know it, but it was a completely rigged thing from the beginning. Private organizations. That's how the world's run. And these same private organizations with their guys in suits and ties and all that, and when you see them smiling and grinning at you, you better remember that face can turn into a very evil entity if you disobey them. because they're psychopathic, you understand? That's the real world. That's how it's run. And they come to the fore when power is up for sale or up for grabs, as you're seeing today. And they're coming out of all professions too. It's quite interesting to see the professionals come out. And you get the sociologist one. So, there's too many people anyway. And the same with the climate change group, They're all fronts for the big foundations behind them. And, there's too many of you, and, clean the world, and all the old folk will die, they say, and it's like it's a good thing. They're all coming out. Because this is a thing I've noticed with psychopaths too. Because they're ambitious, you understand. Some of them are ambitious. And the really intelligent ones know when to keep quiet. They'll watch the course of things before they make a move. But the ones that are chomping at the bit, maybe a bit younger or whatever, they come out openly thinking this is the time they can express whatever they really think. And it'll help depopulate the world, just like the climate change agenda wanted. And if you bring into austerity, then a return of sickness and malnutrition and more child mortality and childbirth, etc. And etc. It's just open. There's nothing secret about it. If you're bringing folk into austerity, I hope you understand what I'm just saying about austerity here. The plan that they said they have to force on the world, and I gave the talks on austerity that the United Nations and all the organizations associated with them to do with austerity and what it meant and all the rest of it. And the politicians all signed on to different bills to rubber stamp. Well, bingo. Here it goes, we might have to bring in rationing. My goodness. Well, nobody's earning anything. Well, except the big corporations have got their hands out and billions get thrown their way, right? And amazing all the different, even the psychologists and the nudgers, the behavioral insights teams are getting millions and billions thrown at them, folks, to manage us and our minds as we go through this and their behavior. They've got their hands out, all the real happy psychopaths. They can grab it quite without a conscience of guilt of any kind whatsoever. They don't have guilt, you see. But this is when you see them come to the fore. Do you know that in some countries you got doctors sending out notices, not really forms, to patients who have disabilities, physical, and it could also be like Down syndrome, for instance. Folk who have who are not dying, folk who have cancers who could live another 10, 15 years with treatment. Saying that maybe they should consider, if they get sick with this COVID thing, not to go to hospital, but they could request just no resuscitation, and it's sent to the relatives mainly for these people, by the way. Eh? Very clever. Don't let the people know. Sent to their relatives. So quietly they'll put you down as well. Don't resuscitate this person if they get sick with this COVID. It's all coming out now, isn't it? Do you realize during the so-called racial hygiene programs of Germany that they copied really from Britain and the US to do with sterilization, but they also started to just kill the people who had psychiatric problems and mental hospitals and things and deformities. How come they're always blasting Hitler? And yet, I've seen this kind of thing going on for years in all countries when the governments get uppity and give more grants out to certain segments of society. But it's done scientifically, you understand. There's nothing personal about killing you, Nothing personal. It's just science, And they're all doing their computer modeling, Our lives are run by computer modeling. I keep thinking about this computer modeling, and Neil Ferguson, already millions and millions and millions are going to die, The guy that they make the star, who believes in empire, and who's pally with all the neocons in America, made into a star-making machinery. And then he's given advice to governments on what he sees and so on. And this is the programs you're going through, that type of computer modeling of this COVID virus. And I was thinking, as I said earlier, without finishing what I was going to say, but there was, I thought about the song, The Sound of Silence by Simon and Garfunkel, because the lines in it, and that was the big thing back then too, when that was written, that song. It wasn't just the signs on the subway and so on. They're scrawled and painted, it's like graffiti type signs, which they were talking about too. They were giving you all the warnings, the signs and the warnings of what was happening at that time and what was to come. As science really, they didn't mention the fact that science is rising and rising, except to give hints at it, if you want to think and decipher it. And he said, and the people bowed and prayed. And it's, again, kicking religion out, to say. Because they say that you can take the people out of religion, but you can't take religion out of the people. They'll look for it elsewhere. Well, they've been given it by the ones who displaced it. And it's the scientists. Academia and the scientists, you see, the experts that can dictate how you're going to live and even why you should live or maybe you shouldn't live, etc. The very things that George Bernard Shaw talked about. And H.G. Wells and all the other great characters that were made into stars too by the same organization behind them. So in The Sound of Silence they say, and the people bowed and prayed to the neon god they made. You see, that's your new god, is science. Electricity. I should say it too, that electricity is the elect, the trick of the elect, and it's true. Because it's dominating everything. Without this, and I remember hearing a preacher, he was dead now, years ago talking about it. He said, this evil thing, this force, this entity called different names, he said it couldn't achieve its goals without the computerization. They can collect all the data on every individual, not just your names, but everything about you, things you don't even know yourselves. It couldn't happen, and do it so easily and effortlessly, eventually, as a computer is developed across the whole planet, and bring it all together and bring it in. And I thought about that too, because I could see that happening myself. And I thought, this certainly has the power to control everybody's lives minutely. The greatest, this is the true orgasm of the ultimate tyrant that's never existed before. This kind of dream, total power over everybody. So you build a thing with your own hands, and then you worship it like a god. There was a science fiction put out about that years ago too. Can't remember the author on that one, where they kept feeding into a short story. They kept feeding into the computers, and they had a system of computers across the world. But one major one, you see, it was the God computer, because it would answer all your questions, and eventually say, is there a God? And then there's a quiet response, you see, quiet, which is silence is terrifying too. Remember that sound of silence, and eventually it lit up and it connected to all the different computers across the planet, and they just fed into, is there a God? And it says there is now. And as these things are very telling and drama, and it stay with you because they're very pertinent. Well, now you have governments not listening to people at all, except select politically correct people. Everybody's out for something. Even the anti-hate groups are out with their hands out there for billions, literally billions. It's a business. So naturally, they're going to see hate wherever, until eventually everything's classed as hate. If you do, a different point of view is hateful. You see. Now it's your thoughts that are hateful. Thought crime. So everything's out there, as I say, for its own purpose, because we live in such an incredibly corrupt time, a corrupt society. You've had a build-up since World War II, increasing build-up of worship of celebrities and multimillionaires, and now it's multi-billionaires, and the very fact they're multi-billionaires apparently gives them better status at dictating to us how we should live. Well, where did that come from? How does that correlate? Doesn't at all, does it? They're made into stars by machinery. They all are. Celebrities. The people follow celebrities. That's what we're told. The Council on Foreign Relations brought celebrities on board with it years ago. like George Clooney and Angelina Jolie and others. Because the people who read all the gossip stuff, that's what you had for years, and as a replacement, a substitute for news, is celebrities. And therefore, when they're talking, suddenly they're in the CFR now. And all the people who follow them and like them, you see, they like them, even though they don't know them. They like them because they like the personas portrayed through fiction, you see. And, well, so-and-so said this, maybe they're right because I like them. People are making decisions because they like them, not because of any intellectual component. We're so manipulated today, it's beyond overboard. Beyond overboard. We've never had a time like this before. And today, I mean, over half the world, maybe 3/4, is in lockdown. Do you realize World War II and World War I and then World War II caused havoc across Europe, especially Europe. Absolute havoc, and massive deaths and slaughter that they were never ever dreamed of before by tyrants, that kind of slaughter. And the energy and power that was expended through technology to do the slaughter. And then World War II came along, and they'd already, from Sandhurst in England, the officer training at Sandhurst were getting taught before World War II came along. And they also brought officers in from other countries, including Germany. And I remember there was a general from Germany, he became a general eventually, who mentioned that Britain was teaching total war. And it worked out in like a manual almost for total war, in that the old wars, and it's true enough, the old wars were often almost localized type events that happened, where a country would send a bunch of troops over, or mercenaries over, to another country where the king was having a Tifley's cousin or whatever, and a battle might happen outside a town even. And it didn't really affect the town much either. But as time went on and weaponry became more efficient and heavy artilleries, etc., then they would lay siege to towns and demolish them like World War I. They've got photographs of old or spent shells, massive shells for the heavy artillery guns. And they're built. You see the people standing down below as these things are tiered up, huge things, about 40 feet high. Some of them, the empty casings, football fields full, and these would come from maybe one main bombardment. They went on for 12 hours straight or more. You can't imagine the energy used to slaughter people. And again, World War II came along, and they had total war, and they said, well, you see, now that we can demolish whole cities like we showed in World War I, then all the civilians are there for legitimate targets, because they'll work in the industries that produce the enemy's aircraft or weaponry and all that. And so it's all legitimate now. It's all decided above, you see. And then they go on about Germany bombing targets in England. Mainly, it was Scotland and two, that Clydeside, and then they hit Edinburgh too, as well. Trying to get the Forth Bridge at one time, because they thought one of the main ships was there too. But anyway, they started bombing England, and but only after Churchill had told them to bomb Berlin. Then Dowding, who was in charge of the Air Force, was all for total war, and they slaughtered the working class populations across many German towns and cities. And of course they kept it quiet for many, many years after the war, because you're the good guys, you see. But in reality, we do live in a fiction, we really do. And then during the World War II, as it was almost ending, they had a meeting with King George residing over it, about depopulation. They said there were too many folk after the war. It hadn't killed enough. And meanwhile, everybody was all fighting, thinking for their country. and their culture and way of life to protect it all. And then you see what happened in the 1960s. But what a joke we live through, isn't it? We do live in a joke, a complete fantasy that's so indoctrinated into us. And every young boy is so susceptible to it, I must admit, because you're brought up with your country is just wonderful. And young guys admire guys in the military. You do that, and that's where you end up going up into the military yourself. That's where it happens. And obviously you think your country must be always in the good, or you wouldn't go in the first place, except if you're really psychopathic. But you have to stop really now and say, wait a minute here, that we live in a completely different system than the one we've been indoctrinated into. It's as alien as something from outer space almost, or Doctor Who. It is so alien to what you've been trained and taught to believe. And it's at times like this, when these things happen, these events happen, where things don't make sense to you, then you've got to question it. What on earth are they doing? An example is very simple. Quarantine of the nation is not a new idea. It's almost chiseled in stone. That here's what you do if some terrible pandemic breaks out, like a Spanish-type flu. You didn't sit and wait for it happening. You know what to do. You close your country like an iron fortress in a sense, with an iron wall around it. You close it right away, according to the data you're given, to call it a pandemic, understand? You don't call it a pandemic lightly. Especially when you've been watching China frantically going around the streets, spraying stuff and caught mists everywhere and so on and so on. But you still allow all the planes to come and go into your own country. They're still coming and going, by the way. I'll put a little clip up by Nigel Farage. Just for the little bit that's in it, you might like, which he says in it. He says they're still in the Heathrow's still bringing like 20 flights a day in or more from the infected areas right now, you know. And I kept wondering why we're all getting locked down while they're still bringing people in like this. Well, if you want to make things, and it's not panning out with numbers and all that, then you've got to literally keep it going until you get enough people in to bring more infection into the country, obviously, to make it happen. Why else would you be doing this? Why else? Come on. You want to bring more and more folk that are outside your country into your country, well, they're citizens or they're dual nationalities or what? It wouldn't matter. You take your chances. You do take your chances that was always been the law. You know, brought in and then given a suggestion before you even come into the country. You're given maybe you should go home and quarantine yourself for a couple of weeks, maybe, you know. They're doing it in England and Canada without telling them anything. They're just coming and going. It's a joke. And if it's such a joke, you're left with questions like, are they really that stupid at the top? No, they're not stupid. If it's happening, there's a reason for it, and it's to make it worse than it is. Really. That's what it seems to be. In Sudbury, here, is just near me, 20 miles away or so. I read the articles like last week or the week before, where it said they're expecting a big spike to happen, and it would happen around, you know, the end of March or beginning. Well, that's when the snowbirds came in, you see, from Florida mainly. And sure enough, they had different people in Toronto and different places, and I think one in Sudbury that came back as snowbirds that had an infection. And I was reading about, from the official website, by the way, for Sudbury on the illness and so on. And what they'd done is move a lot of patients out of the hospital, the main hospital in Science North in Sudbury. Science North, they call it, I think. And they moved them out, a lot of patients out. They had some kind of long-term older people there and so on. But they moved them to another place outside the hospital in preparation for the expected this big spike. And I thought, well, if they're expecting a big spike, as I said at the time, it'd be probably because they're bringing snowbirds in. how else would we get it to? And they said there was no community transmission at the time when I read that last article. I thought, well, they must know that it can only spike in one way in that case. You're going to bring them in or release something. There's no other way to think about it here. And sure enough, you had snowbirds, mainly in southern parts of Ontario and so on. But after moving the people out of the hospital in Sudbury in preparation, I looked it up the other day there. Sudbury has one patient with it. One patient. And then, and I'll put the article up too, that Justin Trudeau is bringing thousands more from people. He said that they're mainly pretty well Canadian dual citizenships and so on, who must be living in other countries all across Africa and parts of India and places like that. And he's given massive loans out to help them get the money to come back and so on and to survive. He hasn't given loans out to anybody here that I know. We're all still stuck in our houses. And if you're susceptible at all to it, because they're told you they won't treat you, or we have to decide now who we will treat before it happens, and people who have pre-existing conditions and a certain age, we can't really help them. Well, let's bring people from all over, right? And Trudeau's excuse for it was, well, it's maybe better they come back here, he says, than be stuck in all these other countries where they've obviously been living, right? Where things might be getting worse for them. Well, what about the folk here who live outside the cities, for instance? Well, here's Agenda 21. You shouldn't be outside the cities. You understand how many things are going to get fulfilled here? It's really astonishing. And the biometric scanners and IDs and so on that China has been issuing. There's an app in China, and to get into different places now, you've got to show it's color-coded that you're healthy and you're cleared of the virus. If you're caught with a red, if it goes red, you've got to show this on their cell phones wherever they're going. Everything's electronic there. And they want to push it here now too, color coding for the same. I gave these talks in the 90s, this would happen. And eventually, if you didn't have your proper vaccinations, you'd be walking into a supermarket and alarms would go off and they'd come for you. Here it is. Because if you really study history and you understand humanity, and you understand the psychopaths that run the system, you can always tell where they're going to go with everything many years beforehand. And you understand that everything that's out there really comes from the weapons industry, the military industrial complex. Your microwave oven comes from it. Old technology they were using even before World War II to communicate even, right? Some more things come from it. So they're looking at all these different, and I remember reading articles years ago after the so-called wall came down in Berlin, and they said, with this going down and the fact they won't need all the weapons industry as much, the big corporations are looking towards surveillance, a surveillance society, and equipping governments across the world with cameras and systems and computerization to survey its citizenry for the peace, to keep the peace. As soon as the Cold War was supposedly finished, right? And so any excuse will do for them. They never change. Agendas never change. Last week too, I mentioned that they oh my God, they made a superstar of a doctor that was giving her little diktats on the television in British Columbia, Canada. Again, the star-making machinery, eh? And her own website with likes and dislikes and all the fake fawning that they put in there. And folk do follow the majority, even though it's fake. They join. That's what polls are for instance. Polls are meant to sway people to go, well, yeah, I didn't think about that, but if all those folk are voting that way, I'll go the same way. That's what polls are for. Look at the history. There's a history of polls and why it was set up. It's convincing people. That's how they really work. I heard a person years ago, a Canadian, it was a woman who voted for Pierre Trudeau, the father. And she said, I know he had a terrible reputation with communism and international socialism and so on. But she says, and proudly told me that she voted because she saw in the polls that more folk were leaning towards him that year. and she thought she'd rather be on the sides of the winner. Nothing to do with the policy. Isn't it amazing? It really works with a lot of people, that whole thing. And what do you think all the yeses are and the likes and dislikes are, as they monitor you, by the way, for liking or disliking something. That's how they got one of the guys in Britain who's been taking his hate crime or thought crime to court, was because he initially put a like on someone's joke, and the cops traced him. I hope people remember that the next time they want you to go off and fight for your country, no, you tell these characters like that and the cops to go and do it instead. Huh? And by the way, all you have to do is to see the police chiefs and see who pays for their holidays and where they go. Now, let's have a look here now. Yeah, the U.S. Navy, right? Under the guise of anti-drug laws getting pushed in Latin America. It's Venezuela they're going to, as we know, eh? So this is the best time, we understand this, for the warmongers to pull things off when folk are the weakest, you see. It's easier for you. And we already know that the whole neocon agenda has always had the same list of countries that they want to take down and dominate completely. And sometimes they'll resurrect the country if they need an enemy, like Russia. I gave that talk back in 98. The bad bear said that if they ever need it again, if they run out of enemies, because don't forget that part of the reason that governments today pretend to exist is to protect you against everything. And it's hard to do it unless you've got an enemy. So you create enemies. You even finance a lot of enemies. And sometimes you even feed them for many years. But this is how the whole con game is managed. But anyway, it's the same kind of technique they're using in Venezuela as they did with Soleimani, the Iranian, that the week before, whatever it was, they passed a ruling in America that the Revolutionary Guard, their official military basically, in Iran was there for a terrorist organization, and which gave them the right then to kill folk, because you're not killing enemies, or even friendly enemies, or even non-wartime enemies. You're killing a terrorist, you see. It gives it a bit of semi-plausibility in the different circle. Well, he was a terrorist. And it's hard to say that the US is going around the world just killing folk they didn't like George Bush Jr. said in the official inquiry, where you look it up, you hear him say it. Well, I never said that Saddam Hussein had anything to do with 9/11, even though they kept saying it all for about a year before they invaded. He said he was just a bad man and the world's better off without him. Well, is that a legality if we go around the world? I didn't like so-and-so, so the military went over and killed him. We bombed them out of existence. Took them back to the Stone Age. Other things behind it, as we all know, and of course we all know. Of course we do. So the same things happen with Venezuela. They don't like the prime minister that's there. They're against Maduro. They want a regime change, as they call it, a regime. When it's their own politician inside, it's the governmental president or prime minister. But when they want to overthrow, it's a regime change. So you get fed up with it, don't you? It's like Groundhog Day with different names, isn't it? Over and over and over and over again. So anyway, the Navy ships are being moved towards Venezuela as his administration beefs up counter-narcotic operations in the Caribbean following a U.S. drug indictment against Nicolas Maduro. So it's a drug indictment. He's now a drug pusher now, you see. We've heard all this before and seen it before. Listen, the CIA and other organizations, by the way, affiliated with this, are down all across the whole length and breadth of Latin America, making sure this stuff's produced. So let's not even get into that debate about it. We know this from history. We know who's guarding the poppy fields too in Afghanistan. We know that Bush took off the order which forbid the growing of poppies by the Taliban. They forbid it. And once Bush got the troops in there, then they dropped that law and encouraged it to grow again. It just... Oh, come on. Remember the Ollie North thing years ago? Oliver North. And the continuity of government under martial law. that came up during that brief inquiry. Everybody's forgotten about. And guns for drugs and drugs for guns and hurrah, hurrah. Right? Goes on and on and on. And they were selling it, of course, they were selling all this stuff to across America, all the narcotics, even for that. Your own wonderful government that's there to save you was selling drugs across the country to young kids and everything. That was happening in Britain too, all through Edinburgh and places, because the London government was participating in it too. Of course they were. Anyway, different story again. You always hit your enemy at the weakest point. I mean, the people who advise and belong to all different strategic organizations for wartime or strategy, geopolitical strategy, they never stop. And they're really, this is when they use this crisis to our advantage, you see, as I say. How can we, and they're just salivating here because this is a great time to start killing folk. And Iran, the war drum is bashing against Iran now because this is when they'll be really weak, when they're in a crisis, a terrible crisis with the virus and so on, and a lot of leadership getting hit and all that. That's when you do it. That's when you do these kind of things. And believe me, I have no love for communism either. I have no love for it whatsoever. But it's really something, you see, what's going on. No, disease or no disease, it continues. So they've given themselves the right to basically arrest someone, pull them back to America and condemn them, like they've done with others before them, you see. It's awfully good for them. And again, they've got the same characters, and you got Rubio and the Florida Republican who's been amongst those calling for a tougher stance against Maduro and so on. But that's only one story. One of many is happening right now. And let's just go to a few articles here. I did save some this week. More than some, as you well know. It's all you're getting now is tune in. Be very, very afraid, children, right? You've got all kinds of people involved with pro-China against China too. This is going on as well, of course, as we know. And you've got the World Health Organization and China and dereliction of duty, as they say. Some are complaining, including Japan too, are complaining that everybody's up their eyeballs in debt to China, that China's taken over the WHO, and you can't criticize it and all the rest of it too. So politics never stops, and geopolitics never stops either. So you can take whatever you want from these kind of articles. However, here's travel vaccines, right? Getting back to the basics here. Enter the digital age, creating a virtual immunization record, right? Isn't that just what you want to hear right now? Well, why not? Because China's doing it right now, right? Why not? But this article, travel vaccines, it's not just travel, now it's going to be permanent wherever you are. This article is from March 2016. See, all these companies look at the money we made from their apps and their tracking and all the rest of it. It's big money, and government right now is throwing out billions and billions to companies like this, throw their hands out, you see. And they can use that, isn't this one, we'll know who's all had their vaccinations. And they've got a whole list of vaccinations they want to give you, and new ones they keep adding to. I hope you understand that. And then boosters they want to keep doing every year or 2 years or whatever. We are the business. We are the business, aren't we? But this is proof of immunization against disease such as yellow fever is required at some international borders in concordance with international health regulations. Then you go through the current standards. International Certificate of Vaccination or Prophylaxis has limitations as a paper record, including the possibility of being misplaced or damaged. So they go through the reasons why we should have electronic ones. We know too the ones we did last week on Bill Gates and the MIT and so on, working together to get even a chip implanted with your data in it. And immunizations, vaccinations, and all that kind of stuff, and tattoos. You tattoo on or put a chip in. And this is real. This is ongoing. They're testing out and so on. And they had a showing of it at one of the last year, I think it was, maybe last year's big tech shows of a guy getting this thing injected into between his thumb and his forefinger, and they implanted this chip into him. They would have so much data in him. He was a volunteer, supposedly. Anyway, they've been hoping for this for years and years and years, and China's got it, to say, on an app on their actual phone. You don't get the green light. I think it's green light or blue light. You can't go outside without that turning blue or green. And if it's red, then and the police catch you, they'll arrest you. Or if you try to get in to pay for food or whatever, that red comes up. You're thrown out, and the cops are called. Another one too is a plan you can't trust. For the past decade, Bill Gates has been warning us about an inevitable pandemic and getting us used to the idea through conditioning. It's apparently Bill's computer simulations discovered that people would easily fold under government pressure combined with an unseen enemy. Billions of people are under lockdown now. Half the world is shut down. Think about that. What they couldn't achieve with a Cold War, or before that a World War II or a World War I, never in the history have they even had one country totally locked down day and night for weeks on end. And they've got it now, with half of the world locked down. This is breaking all kinds of records for tyranny and for again, acquiescence by the public. Well, it's trying to save us all, you see. You understand where this is going to go to save us all? Think about it, eh? But half the world is closed down. Sir Gates must marvel at how easy it was to do. Isn't that true, eh? And then they go into different things about the coronavirus is real, but we've had many waves of flu viruses throughout the years too. And that part's true as well. But this virus definitely is more contagious, it's said. You know. However, most of the folk get it, don't know they've got it or had it. And it is true that the flus, I've got articles here where they give you the official CDC records of the flu for the past few years. You wouldn't believe how many folk die every year of it. And it's true. But with these massive deaths before, there was never a shutdown in the country, or any country for that matter, because of it. So hay is definitely getting made right now, but this is definitely a killer for a lot of them that catch this thing, obviously. But mainly, again, the elderly and pre-existing conditions. Most folk today have pre-existing conditions starting around the age of about 40 and 50, because many different reasons, by the way. We think you're healthy, but not really. This article here also is to do with the civil liberties nightmare of Orwellian proportions, it's called. And it goes into a reality where people were forced by the authorities to remain in their homes under threat of steep fines, while outside the police patrol the deserted streets, ensuring that no one steps outside without official authorization. Then they go into the Orwellian nightmare. It's hardly 1984, but it's then it says this is a scenario of 1984 that we're in right now, and more of it's going to come in the coming days. It's going to be more than just in the coming days. See, this is getting played by the book, folks, and out of this is a completely different system that's going to come out. What they do is they unroll it gradually, the system that we're in right now. And they've got psychologists, and in real time they're monitoring the internet and the chats and so on, to see how you think about things and what you plan to do about it, or if you're unhappy with it, or you go along with the next phase, etc., etc. They know within 5 minutes of putting out a trial balloon, they know exactly what the chatter is, and they know where to pull it back a little bit or extend a little bit or whatever it happens to be. They know exactly. I'm not kidding you. I've read their articles on it, with the behavioural insights teams and so on, and MIT too, in on the act, and many others aside as well. So then roll it out and say, well, in March, you might get locked down for March, and then it'll peak, and maybe it'll start going down a bit. This is how they play you see. So April comes in, and it still hasn't peaked yet, you see. In fact, you wonder if it's peaking out at all in some places. And even the ones with the hospital, I have to mention it too, with some of the hospitals in New York, so folk have gone there, they're not seeing outside what they think they would see. It's just, there's a lot of strange things going on, put it that way. But now that it's April, they're putting out the next trial balloon, you see. Oh, it might have to go another month. You've already had, the fainter voices behind it, but steady though. This is the ones that get to you eventually to program you. This might last right into the fall. And then you get RTL saying, my goodness, it might reappear and resurge in the fall, which means you're right through to what they said at the beginning, as you're going right into next year. You see where it's all going. In Australia, they've already announced that. Australia really has been quite interesting. The authoritarian manner that they've really pushed everything through so rapidly, without any, consequence to those in power. They've locked down the country with even more stringent authoritarian methods, or in the terminology at least, that they're putting across to the public is very Orwellian. And I'll put some things up tonight to show you some links to stories to do with that. We're seeing it. So yeah, you're going to get locked down for a long time. This is how they're playing. Some of them, you almost see them rubbing their hands with glee as they say it, big smiles on their face, because this is going to be wonderful for them. These nobodies are suddenly somebodies, you see. Suddenly they're somebodies, and you all have to obey them. Right? Oh, wow. Isn't that wonderful? Another one too, I'm putting up too, is New South Wales. Here it is. If you break quarantine, you'll be fined $11,000. New South Wales, Australia. Isn't that wonderful? So Brad Hazard, quite a name, You could hazard a guess there where his authority comes from, has announced eye-watering fines for anyone who ignores a 14-day quarantine after entering the state from overseas. Those found to have breached quarantine could be fined as much as $11,000 or even face a custodial sentence of up to 6 months. Right? So that's for the ones here where they just say to them, well, at least Justin Trudeau says in Canada, they just, you please go home and quarantine when you come into the country from abroad. And that's what he says. However, they're asking at the airports in Canada, no one's told them anything. They just wander around, do what they want, and when they come in from the different countries. It's just astonishing, really, isn't it? But as I say, they're not stupid. Don't think they're really utterly stupid at the top. I can only think they want a heavy, heavy loading dose of spread to make things happen. What else would you do? Why else would you do what you're doing? But the guys at the bottom, the ordinary folk who are locked down, can't even move. Right? As I say, they're bringing it here too. I can tell it's coming. They're watching Britain and the feedback and how they're handling the feedback from complaints in Britain. This is how they do things. Then they can implement it more perfectly right off the bat in Canada, where your police will be monitoring you. Are you out for your one short walk per day, sir? And some honest folks, well, I've had 2 short walks a day, I'm sorry, and big fine for that. They might take away one of your toilet rolls, But yeah, we're living through amazing times when you see what's happening. And then you have this one here too. Normal life will not resume for 6 months, said government doctor. Whoa, government, I'm scared of that. And the word doctor makes you quiver these days, the TV version of the doctor. Not a reality, but the TV one, right? So normal life won't resume for at least 6 months. As a government placed all parts of the UK on an emergency footing to tackle the coronavirus outbreak. Oh my goodness, Dr. Jenny Harries, apparently she likes the authority. Just from what else I've read, Deputy Chief Medical Officer for England said the nation will not be in complete lockdown for half a year, but said social distancing measures would be lifted gradually. Her warning at Sunday's coronavirus press conference came as the National Health Service announced the first confirmed death of her frontline hospital worker with COVID-19. And the Cabinet Minister Robert Jennings said, we simply cannot ask health workers to go on to the front line without adequate protective equipment. This all came out, by the way, in a in a test they did 4 years ago, the government then had a big test on a possible coronavirus that would get released and how they'd handle it in Britain. And they said they knew they'd be short of everything. They said it'd be an utter disaster in the test. So here's the test, the real thing happening. And who's surprised? So anyway, the Minister, Robert Jenrick said, we simply cannot ask health workers to go on the front lines without the proper equipment and so on. You see, there's things out there, articles and YouTubes up there with people from China living in the West who make a living on exporting stuff back to China and buying thousands of face masks, sometimes millions, and sending them over there and make a massive profit on them. And leaving not one of them even boasted she's leaving nothing for Americans. So it's just astonishing. And here we are. Now they're floating ideas, y'all know. Don't wear face masks. It's only for medical staff. Like you're too stupid to wear one or something. It was just technical or something. No. We're told that for a week to make sure that enough folk got it. I think really, I caught it. And then, but now of course they've changed their mind. Just. Are you going to follow these characters and believe them on anything here? But yeah, for months they deny, the face mask won't help you. It's like Yes Minister, the old TV program about the ministers or politicians in Britain in charge of things. And the head of them, the civil service at the time, and one program said, he said, never believe anything until it's been officially denied. And that's, always remember that. It's never going to, I won't help you. I know. Doesn't do you any good. But it's good for the doctors and that nurses, but not for you. And now they're telling you, the opposite. Yeah, you could actually start stopping the spread. So if you're wearing it, at least you won't be coughing it out so much. But it also means that obviously you might not be getting as much in from folk who have coughed out. But there you go. These are your specialists. They pay big money for telling this stuff. I tell you, yeah. So anyway, 6 months, right? 6 months spread, to say here, possibly. And then you get, police can now enter homes to look for people gathering now. As I've said before, in New Zealand and Australia, they go a bit ahead. It's interesting, the so-called colonies, the old colonies of the British Empire. Canada, remember, too, is part of this Commonwealth of Nations that they eventually came up with the expression, the Royal Institute for International Affairs, when the old empire went out of favour. But it's the same thing in India, too. And they're more authoritarian in the so-called colonies than the home at Britain. The home of people who stand up for rights, land of the free, all that stuff. But no, the colonies are more authoritarian because that's how they were run, by governor-generals appointed by the crown. And whoever politicians and houses sat in Congress or Parliament were under the supreme chutzpah from Britain, basically appointed by the Queen, Governor-General. Well, that gave them an awful lot of power. They could have the complete authority of the crown to do whatever they wanted to do in times of any kind of crisis, even when it wasn't a crisis. And that never went away. So when you see this kind of thing, it's same in war, but now it's a war on a virus. So they all come out again in the foxholes, they take command, and so, yeah, police can now enter homes to look for people gathering. So police, this is New Zealand, and in New Zealand, they entered a 4-week lockdown to break the transmission of the virus on Thursday. Police officers have pulled over people who were breaking the self-isolation order, apparently unaware it was in place. And the Commissioner, Mike Bush, in a series of TV and radio on Thursday, reiterated that people will initially see the friendly face of police. Initially, this is how they're getting it, the friendly face of police during the lockdown. But we'll be ensuring people will comply, because if they don't, people will die, he said. So there you go. It's badly worded, because you almost think the police are going to kill folk, but of course he's talking about the virus. I hope. And it says the police already had to educate people on the self-isolation order overnight, etc. And they'd first issue a warning, then arrest people if needed. And but I've got articles here about New Zealand and Australia where they're going to go after the hoarders of foods and different things and masks or anything at all that they suspect. By the way, you're now in the Stasi system because governments now set up volunteers to snitch on all their neighbours if they see anything. And of course, you understand how the real thing happened with the witch hunt that they had, the witch hunt that they had in Salem, Massachusetts, where you get great movies made out of it. And I like the movies, they're kind of nice and scary. But in reality, you had a lot of jealousy amongst the different neighbours and farmers who would own better land or more of this or whatever. And they're all vying with jealousy and envy of their neighbours. Well, once that kind of thing started, there's a witchcraft, and then they get rid of neighbours, then they go in and grab the land, you see. Humans are really devious characters. Really, come on. That's how people really are, rather devious. Well, it's the same kind of thing here. It's once you get neighbours some a little bit of power and snitches in this kind of situation, you'll be surprised who comes to the fore and starts snitching. And they don't like certain neighbours. Of course, that's the ones that are going to snitch on. Oh, you said that sod, that, what he's done, I saw him eating an extra jammy sandwich, and you don't allowed one. That's how it goes, you see. So that's all started too, and we're living through this, and they've got organisations set up after 9/11 in the States, for instance, in every community for disasters and all the rest. Well, now they're all going into action. And Britain recruited it was 250,000, or more of them actually. That's for volunteers, and they all ran forward to be the commissars over their neighbours and so on. So I'll put these articles up. Remember that the articles I mentioned, I always put up the links to them, and it's worthwhile reading some of them. And it gives you an idea of what's happening across the world, especially what happens elsewhere happens here, you see. That's what happens. We also do know that amazing things are going on in Germany. German finance minister for the state, their main finance minister kills himself in despair over economic effects of the coronavirus crisis. Well, they shouldn't say that was economic effects of the corona. It's some other reason behind it, obviously. You understand, everything's make-believe, even fiddling the books. Today, every country's got magicians working in your booking system for you, your financial books. And when something this upsets something before money goes back in that technically is missing temporarily for some other purpose, then they lose out and they'll take the blame for it. So there you go. Australia's digital ID biometric capability to move into public testing in the middle of this year, 2020. See, they're all copying China. That was the big trial for it all. So the Digital Transformation Agency, isn't that wonderful? The DTA is anticipating the biometric component of its digital identity play will be ready for public testing by mid-year. Appearing at Senate estimates Thursday night, CEO Randall Brugod said the agency is currently ensuring that the quality of the biometric is exactly where it needs to be before it's pushed out to the masses. To the masses. I like how they speak about it as, we're the masses, folks. Have you heard that before? Well, that's what they called them in the Soviet system, in the Bolshevik system, the masses. Masses don't have names, they have just numbers, The thing that we've been very considerate, what? Writing is so bad now, isn't it? You've noticed so many mistakes. The thing that we've been very considered on is implementation of the biometric features to ensure that the facial verification service operates as expected. It's operating as expected, but it's not production ready, it says. I guess it would hands out again for big grants from the very slaves that's going to pay for it all and be monitored. That's how it works. We would buy our chains. I've always said we buy our own chains in the slavery system. And they're juggling 62 high-cost IT projects. It says, the money is rolling for the big boys, the big corporations. with big money getting thrown all over the place, wish lists as they call them. It says the overall digital identity program, just over Australian $210 million has been spent to date. They've already spent it. How can you spend $210 million to make basically a computerized program system? Come on. So my Gov ID, this is so it's almost biblical. Your Gov ID, that's your government ID, is Australian government's digital identity provider, handled by the Australian Taxation Office. We're all just slaves, aren't we? It's like the 100-point ID check, but on a smart device, and it allows citizens to have their identity verified so they can access government services using that verified identity rather than being verified continually by each Commonwealth entity. It's true enough. One ID thing's, even a chip is better than a whole bunch of them, surely. Just one good chip, or whatever they want to call it. My Gov ID, tagged and numbered, quite something. My Gov ID. What a world, What a world. It's pretty sad and so predictable, really. And that's the big thing about studying for many years, is that nothing really does surprise you, because everything really is predictable. Another article, too, Australia's response to the coronavirus threat reveals we've lost our fundamental values. While the nation is faced with what is arguably the most significant peacetime threat since the Great Depression, it's worth reflecting on how we came together to overcome that tremendous obstacle. And then it goes into the witless brawls and over toiletries at supermarkets and so on. And the Morrison government in Australia has unveiled a $189 billion stimulus package. That's a free-for-all for the big corporations. And the ones, again, who want to ID you and bring out new computer programs to monitor you, and probably your color code that you have in China for, are you safe, are you not safe, have you infected, or possibly infected. $189 billion, in an effort to keep our ailing economy ticking over. That doesn't make your economy, that doesn't make any work at all for the people who can't work, is it? It's for the big corporations. And they're already taking a stand to discourage panic buying and ensure that enough supplies are left in the shelves for most vulnerable members of our community. And it's true, but the fundamental values have gone. I mean, even the stores in Canada, some of them started to, the big supermarkets, I guess because someone complained, that they said that older folk couldn't get to their groceries because the rest of them are plundering the things before they get in. So they said, we'll open them an hour earlier than the morning. So they'd have to get in even from outside, and miles away from the people outside the cities have to get to the grocery stores in the cities, right? An hour earlier. So that they have to literally leave their homes about 5 a.m. Only to find when they go there that everybody's pretending they're old and there's nothing left. It's disgusting. Really, but it's predictable, as I say, very predictable. With the hype and fear and terror that's been pushed on television and even across the internet too, it's just, folk are cracking up intentionally. They know what they're doing at the top. They know what they're doing. I mentioned it before, for change, you've got to stampede the cattle. The cattle like to feed in a nice field, and it's harder to get them moving and started to move when they're enjoying themselves. The longer they're there, and if weeks pass, you're going to have a hard time to get them, unless you have like big explosions going off to terrify them. But otherwise, it's not going to happen. So once you get them moving, if you want change, and you just keep them going. And that's what they do with the public, you see. Keep them moving, and each time they're passing through good pastures, and they'll keep moving because they're terrified. Just keep them terrified, and you can direct where you want the public to go. It's quite easy. It's all stuff taught in the higher realms of behaviorism and management, as they call it, social management. So yeah, terror is a great thing to get people to to just freak out and forget their sensibilities and do what they're told in order to save their lives, you see. So then they go on to they do, and the same article eventually goes into the kind of, like the Green Agenda type speech the woman gave before, very similar. Look back at the war and how we kind of pulled together then, and the Great Depression and etc. This other one too is to do with supermarkets can open at Easter Day and even Anzac Day. This is for Australia and New Zealand. Prisoners may be released from jail early, and police have been given the power to arrest people suspected of breaching self-isolation rules or any other public health directives, part of the new world order that was adopted by New South Wales Parliament on Tuesday night, which Kira MP Ryan Park, who supported the law changes, has described as martial law. I'll put up to a PDF on Australia's policy. It's actually like a martial law policy for those who want to read it, because we're the same everywhere. Canada, Britain, and everywhere else. It's pretty well the same agenda, a martial law type thing. And it's wonderful too. You don't have to bother and pretend with politics anywhere as you go through all this stuff. Just obey if you want to live and survive, and obey. And also police and Australian border force have launched a joint bid to catch people suspected of hoarding supermarket goods and selling them on the black market in Australia and overseas amid the coronavirus outbreak. I'll put that one up too. Quite a few from Australia that someone sent me. And Australia Post opens new concept store that will only ship to China. Quite interesting. Published a year ago, that one too. And China too, because of their system. I remember the milk scandal when the protein was getting taken out of it in China, and some substitute was put in there. It actually killed some babies and all that. And basically melamine, I think they were using as a protein. Because someone is it in the West too, some wise guy bribed somebody in the Food and Drug Administration in America, I think it was, to classify melamine as a protein, and so they could start adding it to milk products. But it was kind of booed down even though it was passed, and so but China went along with it and did it because they could take the protein out and then sell the protein separately. And so at that time, a lot of them were buying milk from elsewhere into China because naturally they wanted the real stuff. It wouldn't harm them or their children. I remember the same thing happened in China with diapers. It was just too expensive in China, and so they were sending it in bulk from Australia to them. So I'll put that link up to how bulk supplies of Australia's face masks, hand sanitizers, and other vital medical items were shipped to China as the coronavirus pandemic took hold. Well, there's articles too from America and Canada. They even had articles praising them. This wonderful woman in Toronto was sending it up to China for her relatives, thousands of them. Well, how many relatives has she got? But I mean, but praise is a nice thing. But I thought, there's nothing here for Canadians. Now that we're supposed to wear them, or shortly, you can't get them. Because we're telling the peasants here they're going to pay for this. Oh, you can get a scarf and put it around your face. It might give you some protection. At least you won't be spreading it if you happen to maybe not know that you have it. So we can't get the real things because they're all been shipped elsewhere. But they want us to wear something. Of course, the biometric cameras now apparently they can tell who you are by judging the space between your on your forehead and your eyes to your nose. And so they don't care so much now if you're wearing masks or towels or scarves around your face, I suppose. It's amazing how they can change their minds about things, eh? And a quick guide to safe shopping during the COVID-19 pandemic, it says here. I have to laugh at some of the expert advice we're getting now. It's just like, my God, it's idiocracy. It really is. They even accept the fact that these highly paid BS artists, that's bothersome stuff artists, have got the gall to take the big handouts they get from governments to tell us stupid things that children know naturally. Better than Russell, it says the public won't be able to move without expert advice. And this is an article too. This is how many people die from the flu each year, according to the CDC. I've got a couple of articles like that. They've got graphs in the official report. It's just astonishing. We actually have lower deaths right now across the whole of Europe as well than we've had in the last couple of previous years. So what's going on here? If these are official studies and official reports by the same official people that are terrifying us right now, you really wonder what's going on. The one is from Global Research, the articles, and this one here is it's from, let me see, Ask an Expert, one of the official sites. Yeah, it's a health thing, explorehealth.com, and they give you the flu ones and so on. But the Global Research one has the official ones from the organisation that runs and does all the stats for Europe, the whole of Europe, year by year, and you'll see the graphs on it that I'll put up. And we're way down. We're actually got fewer overall deaths than previous years. 2 years ago was a really nasty one across Europe. So I'll put them up as well. And I love too, have you noticed too, that you get all these happy, PR, motivational experts that come on radio now, and I listen to the radio, and they're on radio telling you how to, here's how not to go mad at home, and look upon it pleasantly. How can I, again, turn this crisis to your advantage and learn how to relax at home. And it's hard to relax at home if no money's coming in. It's hard to relax at home if you're like 20 to 30 miles from a city, and the time you go there's nothing left, or they give you 2 cans of beans and you're supposed to go home. It's a lot of gas, or petrol as they say in Europe, but it's a lot of gas. So it's kind of hard to go home and say, well, I think I'll just sit here and take advantage of this happy time here to get myself, and they tell you these wonderful side effects. Well, you'll eat less, you might lose weight. Well, there's a lot of skinny folk too. They're not all over obese and so on. And apart from that, the kind of food we have these days too is so low in real nourishment. These things don't really matter to the guys telling you how you should just be happy and use it to your advantage. I tell you. Ask an expert. There you are. Ask an expert. Yeah. Then we have Trudeau again. As I've said before, he's been bringing lots home. Still, there's not enough in the country at the moment to cause a problem, it seems. But Trudeau defends new flights bringing Canadians home from across the globe, he says. He says Canadians being flown home from abroad must subject themselves to rigorous and mandatory 14-day self-isolation to keep their fellow citizens safe. They've been living abroad for years. So Canadians must look out for each other, but they have a duty not to infect others. Well, maybe you should take that to heart. So he says, the government announces today that 6 planes carrying Canadians stranded in Africa and Europe are to touch down today in the effort to repatriate travellers stranded by COVID-19. So the Global Affairs Canada says the planes will arrive from Algeria, Ecuador, Senegal, Democratic Republic of Congo, Hungary and Spain. Yeah, Spain's a hot spot, some of the other ones are too. The department says the government is planning more flights from Ethiopia, Burkina Faso, Côte d'Ivoire, Peru, Algeria, Poland and Pakistan in the coming days. Plans are also being made for several flights from India, starting April 4th and continuing for the next 4 days until April 7th. They're not really stranded, these people, we understand, but a lot of them live elsewhere. They live elsewhere and maybe come here once in a while. A lot of folk, this is the way things are, They'll come and they'll get their citizenship, then they'll go off to other countries to make more money, because they can often get grants from Canada too across the world, especially through the UN, and this is a big part of it, the UN programs for changing other countries. These very countries mentioned, in fact, they're trained in giving courses, and then they're financed, and they even have houses. I remember reading an article where some of them in Africa, some of the women they sent back were given, there were massive estates built for them. You can't believe what really goes on. Anyway, here's what it says too. It says, after telling you that folk have no work here, right? About a month ago it said that most Canadians can only survive financially for about a month. Well, it's longer than that now. But here it says, the government says it's approved 449 loans worth $1.4 million under its emergency program for Canadians abroad. And it's processing another 900 loan applications. Whoa, wait, what's going on here? What's going on? How about the folk that's already here and didn't go to live abroad elsewhere? Ah, dear. These are the times in which we live, eh? And also this article to do with everything we need to know about the virus, it says to date. Eh? The stacks and stacks of these articles. And the Chinese government is reportedly telling citizens to use a mobile app that tells them if they will be quarantined for the novel coronavirus. It uses a color code. According to the New York Times, green means people can travel freely, while yellow or red indicates they must report to the authorities. And e-commerce and the giant Alibaba and its sister company Ant Financial run the app, which also reportedly sends people's information and location to police. That's what they're bringing out here, eh? And in Australia too. The app represents an unprecedented use of consumer smartphone technology by a nation state to respond to a public health crisis, and privacy advocates worry it's giving the Chinese government an excuse to harvest more citizen data. Maybe we should wonder about them doing the same things they want to unroll here from the previous articles I've just read. Anyway, among the coronavirus outbreak, Chinese citizens are reportedly being required to use a smartphone app that tells them where they should carry them on as usual, or report to a medical facility to be quarantined. But they've got to show it too, the colour, when they go into stores now. A lot of it actually shows you that in some of the photographs they show you. But yeah, it's all to come here too, eh? And make hay while the sun shines. Well, don't let a great opportunity go to waste to mark all the public, eh? And another article too, it's quite interesting on financial systems, and this was Corona Capital Jeffries Abbott Labs fund deals, it says, how a company has just landed a windfall as it bought over another company quite recently. They just got handed a massive contract. It's not insider information, no, it's just pure luck, etc. But I'll put that one up. And it tells you how much the company paid for this other company and so on. And the opposite of buyer's remorse, the market value of Abbott Laboratories, which obtained approval for a rapid coronavirus test, rocketed over $10 billion at the start of US trading on Monday morning. Some folk just read the tea leaves better than the teacup, you know. And there you go. And then you have COVID-19 yet to impact Europe's overall mortality, it says. This is by Off Guardian Global Research. And it says official figures for 24 countries across Europe show not only that overall mortality is not increasing, but so far is actually well below the recent averages. The statistics were gathered by the European Monitoring of Excess Mortality for Public Health Action. That's the name of the big partnership of agencies for Europe from 24 European nations aiming to promote preparedness for public health emergencies. This is an official group here. They track excess mortality, meaning the number of officially recorded deaths. And it shows you the maps over the last few years, year by year. And as I say, 2 years ago, the deaths were incredible across parts of Europe, including Scotland, I noticed, and parts of England too. And the colour-coded maps to show you the infected rates and then the death rates for the last few years, including the present year. So there you go. I mean, you got all this. Again, statistics can just terrify you. Absolutely terrify you. Because that's what they're used for often. And then economic fallout mounts along with competition for gear, it says. It's put 10 million Americans out of work. I think it's more than that now, within 2 weeks. And 6.6 million new unemployment claims on top of 3.3 million last week came as a competition for scarce ventilators, masks, and protective gear seemed to grow more desperate. And you know, there's another one from, there's a few videos out there by doctors and professionals who are also part of, I think it's the Hoover Institute, giving you awfully good opinions. You should look them up on YouTube. And one of them is explaining, one's a virologist and a specialist in the area for the government, but he said that they really don't, the stuff that Fauci and others are quoting, honestly, he says they don't know how many folk have got it. And it's true, very few folk get the test, you understand, very, very few. And now I've got articles where, just like the H1N1 that happened for you, they're actually, when the doctors were told, oh, it's just overwhelmed, just put them all down as H1N1 if they got a sniffle. Well, they're doing the same thing now with this one. Naturally, they're doing it, which inflates the number. And then the ones who've got it, most of them don't even know they've had it, you see. So it's a big numbers game going on for different purposes, obviously. Things just don't add up properly on any possible front whatsoever, including the definition of a pandemic is and the numbers. They were way, way under the numbers needed at the time when they declared it was a pandemic. When you go through it all. Officially, I'm not talking about people's guesses, I'm talking about reality. But the Hoover Institute, they had the top virologists saying the same thing, that when he's asked the question, what about the numbers? He says they don't know. They really don't know. How many people really have it in the US or Canada? The real total, they don't know. It's all computer figures. It's just like how they work out the future, the climate change thing, and we'd all be dead. There'd be no icebergs by about 10 years ago and no snow. Al Gore said you'd have to tell children what snow used to be like. Here I am, still got about 5 feet out there in the fields. And it's April, See, facts don't matter. It's computers that take the lowest thing that could happen to the highest, and it supposedly works out a thing. But I guess, you don't need a computer for that, folks. And the computer, they're all used. All these decisions from computer come from the statistics from computers. They're all meant for political decisions or big corporate decisions at the very top, to change policies, to use it as evidence. It's a magician's trick. It really is what it is, because it's mainly just guesswork. So they're using these. It's like Neil Ferguson, as I've mentioned before. That's quoted by people at the top. Well, this is the same guy who's been behind different things in the past that didn't work out too well for even farmers in Britain and elsewhere. But now it's with humans, and they've got this massive, millions and millions are going to die, and now they're bringing it down and down and down, eh? And we're still all under lock. We're getting worse under lock and key, basically. But it doesn't matter as the numbers drop. There's a bigger agenda behind this, obviously. But computers, the people bowed and prayed to the neon gods they made. Yeah? The replacement, you see, the computer, tell us what we should do to save us. Oh God, computer. Mm-hmm. And here we are, eh? And they quote this stuff as though it's holy. Honestly, isn't it? It's like an oracle. It's like an oracle, the oracle at Delphi, where the woman on the chair she's getting stoned with all the gases coming up out of that area, and she's hallucinating, and she'd ask questions, and she'd, come April, you're going to find out that millions will die unless they obey the god Zeus. This reminds me of an awful lot, in fact, that was said by Lord Bertrand Russell, who was he pushed what appeared to most folk at the bottom. They thought it was all for themselves. They stood up for them. No, he didn't. He was looking towards scientific socialism on behalf of ruling the world, with his own upper class running it all, of course, with scientific academia managing all, every facet of it, in fact. That's really what he was after, scientific socialism. And he said if there's to be a tyranny, meaning a tyranny over the world to make everybody conform and do what they're told, he said, I would much prefer it to be a scientific tyranny. And so when you think about what he said and what they've been working at all along to promote the white-coated priests, the scientists over the people as they displace all other religions gradually. And then they bring you even diseases through their science and so on, through laboratories, and it escaped from here or escaped from there. They've had many in the past, of course, across the world, same kind of thing. And they brought you the atom bomb and other kinds of incredible weaponry, all through science. And with the present crisis, again, supposedly from a laboratory, so we're told it could be, it seems to be sort of thing, according to the evidence we're given at the moment, but we're not given much at all, because we're in the dark, we're the mushrooms, we're fed you know what and kept in the dark. However, when you think about what Russell said, a scientific tyranny, and the answer to it all, of course, will be big pharma and vaccinations down the road, and including bracelets or ID implants and so on to monitor. So science causes the problems, and science gives you the solutions. So yeah, he was quite right. As a scientific tyranny we're under today, naturally. And most folk think it's all quite normal because they've been brainwashed to listen to a constant array, as Bertrand Russell said himself, of experts until the public can't think for themselves. They'll only obey experts. But here it is, we're going through it all again with the same kind of thing. And even the mayor of Toronto, I think it was the mayor of Toronto, or maybe it was the Premier of Ontario. He said, it was one of the two of them. He said, it was Ford anyway, and he said, he says, well, I didn't want to contradict a statistic given out on what might happen. He says, because all computer programs are different. They're all competing with each other for numbers to get more ratings for each other. We're the important ones. We're right. No, you're wrong. And he says he didn't want to put out conflicting data from a different study. So it's all like, honestly, it's like these are the oracles, you know. What did the oracles say today? Well, you know, you'll have to have another month in quarantine and maybe even the rest of the year. Yeah. This is how it is, isn't it? And then you get the fever heat maps hint at turning point in US COVID-19 cases. This is from JP Morgan analysts, the banking boys. So the turning point it says in the US hospitals may happen in a matter of days rather than weeks. Two analysts at financial services firm JP Morgan have. You see, they've got more optimistic programs in their computers. You know, they generally are always right. They always seem to profit from the profits. And so here you have it. It says the analysts made the projection on the basis of data from Kinza Insights, the healthcare firm that has generated heat maps from over 1 million internet-connected thermometers used by people all over the US. So they go through their formula and from their great computer system, and they're more optimistic, see. It says the amount of cumulative unexpected illness, it says, expressed as additional share of the population affected by influenza-like illnesses, and the amount of cumulative unexpected illness expressed as additional share of the population affected by influenza. See, everybody's getting put down as influenza-like illnesses, and often it's getting shoved in because they're not testing. You have to have a whole bunch of it, supposedly the expected symptoms. And to fit the criteria, their age group, blah, 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 gender, to even be considered for a test. And this is how so they're putting everybody down as, self-quarantine at home, stay there. And you'll be down as a possible, and then a presumed, and then they'll just say confirmed, even though there you go. It's a numbers game. It says the World Health Organization says 90% of COVID-19 patients have high fever as an early symptom. Well, that's contradicted by other stacks of studies. This is one of the diseases. It seems to be that every possible symptom under the sun for every other disease have got it. Well, you might or might not have a runny nose. You might or might not have an upset stomach. You might or might not have diarrhea. You know. It goes on and on. It's just amazing. And anyway, the report, New York Times, pointed out how Kinza's data has been recently indicated an unusual rise in fevers in South Florida, even though it was not known to be COVID-19 epicenter at the time. South Florida became the hotspot days later, but the data all point to spots in Florida, Michigan, Arizona, and eastern Texas, where not so many cases have been reported, it says. And so the analysts at JP Morgan have been tracking the fever data made available by the firm found that the COVID-19 pandemic started spreading in March, with the atypical illness readings peaking in the third week of this month, and has been declining since then. The real-time data leads to hospitalization data by about 5 to 10 days, possibly the time taken by an individual to test and be hospitalized. And analysts spotted an inflection of atypical influenza fly in the third week in real-time data to conclude that it appeared the containment measures in the US were showing results. Mind you, too, you've also got at least two other flus right now prevalent. There's articles about H1N1 type A out right now as well. It was comical. I listened to late night AM sometimes. Good reception from the States. I'm not a fan, different talk show hosts, although some of them are kind of humorous too, But one of them was Michael Savage. People know Michael Savage. He plays the right-wing pro-Trump character at times when it suits him or whatever. But he mentioned that he'd had an upset stomach, which was one of the symptoms. You might or might not have it. Again, this disease, they've wrapped in every possible symptom under the sun to make sure that it's got big numbers in it. But Michael Savage phoned. You're supposed to phone. You see, same in Canada. You've got about 6 different agencies they phone through, and they'll decide where to bump you up to the next one because you might have a symptom until you get the final one, and then you might get to talk to someone that's got the authority to have you tested. But so in the States, he got a woman, a doctor, who says, yes, she was kind of brusque, and he knew from the start, he says, that it wouldn't go well. But he mentioned that she went through the symptoms. Have you got this? No. Have you got this? No. What do you have? I've got an upset stomach. And he says, well, you don't fit the criteria. He says, what do you mean? Here's a list of official symptoms. Says that might be one of them. And he got nasty, and she got nasty, and then she just hung up on him. So he said the same thing. You can't get tested. But his call might go down as having had it, you see. So there's another number added to it, and lots like that too, you see. There's a lot of games going on here as well, obviously. But it's quite interesting what's happening. And again, Wuhan residents say the coronavirus figures released by China don't add up. Well, I guess everybody admits to the same thing. Even if the figures we're getting here don't add up. Yeah. Coronavirus general practitioner surgery apologizes for sending do not resuscitate form to patients. I mentioned that earlier. This is the actual article. And it says, the note says, those with severe illnesses were unlikely to be admitted to hospital and would not be offered a ventilator bed. Well, that's in accordance with the guidelines for the hospitals, actually, from the previous articles I've read for the last few weeks, where they admitted in Canada too that that people with pre-existing conditions and that would probably get less treatment, if any at all, because they'd only give the medications and that out to, and the care out to those that were more likely they could pull through, meaning younger people or whatever. It's all eugenics, of course, you see. So anyway, he's one surgery, GP apologizing for saying them, don't resuscitate to patients. It says so severe illnesses were unlikely to be admitted to hospital and would not be offered a ventilator bed. There you go. That's comforting to know, eh? Mind you, I suppose they'd want your organs. They could always sell them. A GP practice has apologized after sending a letter to patients with serious illnesses to complete a do not resuscitate form in case their conditions deteriorated due to the coronavirus, if they got it. It was delivered to people with life-limiting illnesses such as incurable cancer and motor neuron disease. That covers a whole wide field of things. Linfey surgery in Misting, South Wales, also said that completing the DNA CPR, do not attempt CPR, form had several benefits. This is in Wales, I believe. So the particular surgery in Misting, South Wales has apologised. It claimed doctors and family and friends would know not to call 999 if loved one's condition worsened. And 999 over there is like 911 here, you see. Which of course is 666 upside down if you want to go into that area of it too. Anyway, it says, therefore, do not use scarce ambulance resources and risk transmitting the COVID-19 to others. So just stay at home and die. The letter has been published on Twitter with a quote from a patient saying, it made me feel worthless. I've lived with cancer for 8 years and I want to live another couple of years. And I'm not digging my grave yet. The note started by saying this is a very difficult letter for the practice to write to you. It's amazing if they want permission too for you to agree to get killed or die off. They said people with life-limiting, very legalistic illnesses were at much higher risk and were likely to be offered unlikely to be offered hospital admissions. It ended by saying, we will not abandon you, but we need to be frank about what the next few months holds for us, it says. So there you go. On Wednesday, the Gwyn Taft University Health Board said the letter was not a health board communication and that the surgery was apologising to patients for causing distress, saying it was not their intent. Well, what else was it? What do you think of it? What kind of psychopath wrote that, eh? There you go. This is astonishing, really. And they'll all be down as organ donors. I'm sure they'll snatch them. I tell you, if they could rinse out your organs, if you had the virus, and neutralise them, they'd sell off your organs regardless. This is the corrupt system in which we really live, I'm telling you. And Iceland's testing is an interesting study. Iceland's very important. They've had documentaries out years ago about Iceland because they're pretty well homogenous population, been for centuries, marrying themselves within themselves and so on. And so a pretty pure type genetic strains, very well mapped and so on. And so they know what illnesses they're prone to within their families down through the generations and what's likely to happen in the future. But they also have a big testing ground there for big pharma. Set up a huge complex there, actually, a big massive skyscraper at one point. And they use it like a test case for testing stuff on them. Like different drugs, medications and all the rest of it, because they have that kind of, they get more uniform results because they're basically homogenous people. But because of that too, mind you, I think they're using an awful lot by giving stuff they shouldn't be taking. We're here to help you. This won't harm you a bit. Then they study you. Anyway, it's a small nation, right? There's only 364,000 people with strong healthcare. They have a strong healthcare and a supportive social system. So they tested all the different people, a good chunk of the people in it. And it says, to get the statistics again, right? They've carried out 10,000 tests, far less than what other countries have done, but on a per capita basis, it ranks first in the world. So out of a population that size, you see, that's a lot. Not all the results from Iceland's tests have come through yet, but the ones that have showed that half of all cases are asymptomatic at the time of testing. This would suggest that, on the one hand, the virus is not as dangerous as we thought, but on the other hand, it would also suggest that it had spread far more than we're currently aware of. These results are also indicated by a testing survey carried on an entire Italian town of Vio, population 3,300, where the results showed that more than 50% of all cases are asymptomatic. The whole population of the village was tested and 3% of the residents tested positive. Then after a 2-week lockdown, the population was tested again. The transmission had been reduced by 90% and the results were confirmed, and the majority of cases seemed to be asymptomatic. Interesting. So it's still a rapidly unfolding situation across the world. However, they gave you these different studies that they're showing, and it isn't. There's so many are just asymptomatic. A lot of the asymptomatic ones don't show any, never get it. Some of them in China, they noticed, would have no symptoms for weeks sometimes, and then they develop symptoms. But there's stacks of them are coming out now with different countries saying that they never had any symptoms that they can remember. So it's very confusing. But it's definitely hitting, I think it'll definitely hit gene sequences. It depends on your gene sequence for you, your own particular genetic makeup, maybe from ethnic group or mixtures or whatever, that'll make you more or less prone to things. As I said before, weeks ago, that A-type blood group was more prone to it, for bad outcome, that is. Not necessarily, it doesn't mean you're going to get a bad outcome if you've got type A, but they're more prone to it, and again, their studies to have bad outcomes. But it didn't mention that it might also depend on your age group too, or other pre-existing conditions. Again, it can be awfully confusing and misleading unless you have awfully good detailed case studies and proper detailing. And I mentioned too that before last week, or a week before, I mentioned that they'll be using the patients that have had it and now have antibodies, and then they'll be taking the serum basically and getting antibodies from it. And I mentioned too, but the Red Cross did a big blood drive. That was a separate article, but I tied it together because I know darn well that's what they do. And for the very, very important and wealthy, and maybe even the military. You remember these things. The pecking order of importance in a governmental system is, number one, preserve itself, continuity of government. And for that, they need police, military, and everything else. So they've got all this stuff on standby for the important people, as they call them. And we're just the masses at the bottom, so we probably won't get these transfusions if it's needed. To give you the antibodies to kill it off. And it works awfully well, by the way. This is nothing new about this or novel about that at all. They've done it in previous... they even did some of that, in fact, back in the Spanish flu towards the end. There was trials of it getting done then, taking the stuff from survivors. And it worked awfully well. Did the same thing in Africa. African doctors got so sick at the WHO that just had doctors sent over there to study them. The African doctors went to work, so we've got to try and save them. And they did the same thing there with folk who had Ebola. And they saved an awful lot of people. It worked like a charm for them. So now they're mentioning it now. This week, they're putting the two together. I put together a week before it, saying they might try to do this in America. I'm sure they've already done it, actually, to more important people. Immunity passport. So you get your immunity passport, could speed up return to work after COVID-19, just like Chinese, you say. It's not just coincidence. So German researchers studying how lockdown restrictions could be lifted for some people and so on, just like China. Immunity passports for key workers could be a way of getting people who've had coronavirus back into the workforce more quickly, as scientists and politicians in the UK have suggested. It says researchers in Germany are currently preparing a mass study into how many people already are immune to the COVID-19, allowing authorities to eventually issue passes to exclude workers from restrictive measures currently in place. So there you are. Isn't it just coincidence that everyone just copies the same agenda, isn't it? And all the hands are out by the big high-tech companies that own them, and millions and billions are getting thrown around like it was just confetti. And then this one here is police chiefs are drawing up a new guidance warning forces not to overreach their lockdown enforcement powers after withering criticism of controversial tactics deployed to stop spread the virus. It comes after they find that some forces are going beyond the legal powers to stop the spread, with one issuing a summons to a household for shopping for non-essential items. You go through your bags in Britain, and you're only allowed to buy essential items, and the cop decides what's essential. And another telling locals that exercise was limited to an hour a day. There you are. It's quite amazing, isn't it, what we put up with, and we just accept it, don't we? It's like, well, it's like war. In World War II, they used to always say, well, it's war, and you have to put up all the hardship. Well, it's war, you can't get this, can't get that because of war, and got to pull together for the greater good. And here we have, this article continues with Lord Sumption, who spoke out against what's happening in Britain. He was the high judge from Britain for a long time, I think. And he's turned against what's happening in Britain. He said that it's turning Britain into a police state, singling out Derbyshire police, which deployed drones and dyed a lagoon black. They dyed a whole lagoon black for trying to shame people and using their undoubted rights to take exercise in the country and wrecking beauty spots in the fells. This is straight out of Doctor Who, this kind of nonsense. And the Guardian has learned that the National Police Chiefs Council and College of Policing, NPCC, is rushing through guidance reminding the officers that despite politicians' warnings, they cannot bar people from going for a run or a drive. They've actually been fining folk for having a drive. I tell you, you cannot give this kind of power to people. Honestly, it doesn't stop, you understand. It gets worse. And I guarantee you that they're going to drag this on as long as they can, as if the little trial balloons. This might go on to the fall, and it might. And then other articles say, this is how they feed it to you. Eh? Psychologists are designing it all. And then they'll have another article saying, close to the first one, no, it might go on to the fall. It might recur again with a second wave in the late fall. So they'll take it into next year. This is how they do it step by step. They treat you like children. And you've got all these behaviourists working with them and how to put it across to the public. I'm not kidding you. It's just the government's got batteries and levels of these I call them con men and women with fancy titles. And that's what their job is, to coax you along like an animal. And then, of course, once they want to give you and make you immune from it, they call it herd management. In health, they do. We call it herd management. Anyway, it says, so I'll put a link up too. I think Lord Sumption's got there's actually a video up on him too, maybe. But he talks about it. You can't give this kind of power to the police, how they're turning it into a police state. And he should certainly legally know that. I mean, you don't need to be a judge to know it, but he knows what the laws are, and he says it's not lawful what they're pushing. India's coronavirus lockdown sparks mass migrations and an economic catastrophe and a crisis of faith in Modi. It's just astonishing, because about 2 months ago and 3 months ago, when Trump went over too and then signed his deal with China, with India, to buy armaments and stuff, they had articles in the... And again, don't forget that India is also part of this big free trade agreement. Where we, the so-called advanced, how can we call ourselves advanced countries now? Eh? We pay for the developing nations. We're still paying for China, through developing nations agreements and free trade and the GATT. As we go down the tubes, you see, and we're paying now for the whole Pacific region, etc. The other big agreements done, and India. To come up. Well, India had articles just before Trump went, how they're going to buy, so many brand new military aircraft and a whole bunch of ships and an aircraft carrier or two. And I thought, come on. I mean, that's not your priority here. Well, and here they are now, going berserk, because if folk get sick in India, you won't get the crops and everything else, and yada, yada, yada. And suddenly, reality hits home. That you have to start taking care of more important things first before you start thinking about spending all this money on aircraft and military and weapons and all the rest of it, and having big grandiose ideas. So anyway, it's going to be, there's so many poor folk in the untouchable class there that have no place to live right now. They can't get back to theirs. They're forbidden to travel on the roads, like walking hundreds of miles sometimes back home, because there's no work for them now as everyone's in quarantine. Nowhere to stay. Disaster in the making right there. And then this one here, talking about Canada too, or Ontario. Dr. Peter Zallen, to protect the north, it's time to close the roads to all but essential traffic. After that, judge from Britain says they can't stop you from going for a drive. And it mentions Pinecrest Nursing Home, small community 150 kilometres northeast Toronto, all started mid-March with mild chest symptoms, and 4 patients were ill on Tuesday, 8 were ill on Wednesday, and by Thursday it was 12. By Friday, 23, 3 have tested positive for COVID-19. All 9 are presumed to have died of the virus. And by the way, that actually does happen with flu seasons as well, and these old folks' homes where they're crammed together. It's just waiting. I did talks on that years ago. Same kind of thing. 17 members of the staff tested positive and 34 have symptoms. So it's quite something. In Quebec, in Canada, the government announced on March 28th it is removing immediately to protect some of its provinces' more remote regions from the spread of the virus by setting up checkpoints to block non-essential travel. If people attempt to enter or leave the regions that are not providing an essential service, if they're not going for health reasons or for humanitarian reasons, they will be sent home. Quite something. And what else we got here? We got more banning things on Britain and elsewhere. So it's just endless, really. Why is the government relying on nudge theory to fight coronavirus? Well, as I say, it's all behaviours. The money is getting thrown out at these... I have no words for them, actually. Because they got connections to government, these characters, and they can get the billions thrown their way for, we can do our thing to really convince the public to go along with this. Honestly, we can do it quite easily, Yeah. So this says here, they go into the social distancing and the banning large sporting. It says, but instead Britain isn't going the hard way. It says it's using behavioural nudges, such as wash your hands, don't touch your face, don't shake hands with others, stay at home, etc. And they go into how it's a different approach used by Britain than in China, although it's a liar, because Britain's also using a lot of the things they're using in China. But they mention that they're still using it. I read that articles years ago with Cass Sunstein, who was a guy who made a name for himself. I think he worked for Obama at that time. And he calls himself a kind of behavioural, an amateur, or a kind of lay-type behavioural specialist. And all his pals, they hangs around are behavioural specialists and so on. And so he uses insights about our mental processes to change our behaviour through coaxing and positive assertion, rather than forcing us to do things, nudging tweaks in environments in which we make choices. The Bernays technique, For example, by requiring people to opt out of organ donation rather than opting in. That's what he does. He gets you to accept things. They brought him out in Britain a few years ago, Sunstein's bunch too, and Richard Thaler, and paid them big money because they're so well connected to government, these characters. They can get money for nothing, literally, and big money at that. To con the public into doing what they want them to do, including paying taxes. They can convince you just feel guilty about it, and then make you offer money to charity, and then make you offer your organs and stuff like that. I hate these characters. I really do. I have no time for them at all. Disgusting characters. Anyone who wants to get into the subconscious of people to manipulate their behaviour, I have no time for at all. Not at all. So anyway, they're working for Britain's government, and this is what the article's about. And of course, all the behavioural insights teams are working on board with it too, which I've mentioned over the years. Ofcom, another one too, was set up. Ofcom, OFCOM, set in Parliament June 2001. You see, just coincidence to do with it'd be a super regulator to oversee media. With before 9/11 happened, it just again they saw the tea leaves there and says, this would be a good thing you have here, where we could stop, and manage and police digital transmission on the internet. And so they gave them all this authority, and it's based in Wales in England. All Wales is different, but they call it it's part of the UK. Anyway, it says they've managed to censor the company. They've even put, I think, RT off the news and the internet for the British systems and so on. And so it's a censoring department who decides who's going to be on, who's not going to be on. Very much like some organisations in the States do it for the States. Or thought police, And the UK government to give Ofcom power to police what is posted on the internet. But it's up in 2001, and now it's going the next step, until they're really just complete censorship department. And it doesn't surprise me. Everything is always going to come along that they talk about. Also, lines of fresh graves dug at cemetery amid coronavirus pandemic. This is Ireland. As funeral directors urge the public to respect social distancing rules. I don't think it's that level yet of deaths, but everything's terrifying the way that they put it across, isn't it? And Toronto imposes mandatory COVID-19 quarantine rules for at least 12 weeks now. So there's a new rule put out in Toronto, apparently. I don't know if this person who's put it out is already a star yet, another doctor, or whatever. But that's what they use, make them stars, since they dictate to you like some kind of, I don't know, celebrity. And again, China scientists isolate extremely effective antibodies that may help treat COVID-19. It's the blood one I was telling you about. And, yep. And this whole idea with universal credit and unemployment money now may have to change. Nearly 1 million people have been forced to sign up for unemployment benefit due to the coronavirus pandemic. I thought it was a lot more than that, actually. There's more to come, I'm sure. I think this one is in the UK. And it says the new welfare system is designed to provide an incentive for people to get work, but enable claimants to keep receiving benefit payments alongside income from a job. Eh? This is all part of the universal income basic and all that kind of thing. So now, of course, that's going to get hammered now too. You're going to bring in rationing is what they want to do eventually, regardless. And I'm also going to put up, let me think now, just before I finish off here, I'll put up, as I say, the one about Australia, which is the emergency laws that they put up. I've got them for Canada too, and for the US. And I'll put up, let me think now. A second company sent 90 tons of Australian medical supplies to China. It was, of course, you had nothing left for yourselves. The same in Canada, the same thing. What a world, eh? And the army has been called in Australia to help enforce strict new quarantine rules. We're going to get them everywhere too. Initially they'll come in supposedly to help and dish out things and maybe give you a couple of cans of beans. But eventually they turn for the real purpose is to really act as policemen. And it's amazing too, don't forget that they're cancelling a lot of elective surgery and essential things. Folk are dying for their reasons here too. They can't get treatments and so on. They're already talking about more folk dying who are dependent on drugs which are made in China. Because we make nothing outside of China anyway, it seems, except debt. That's what we make. Ridiculous. Interdependent, they called it. Which means you're totally dependent on China for everything you need to survive. Yeah, quite amazing. Now, anyway, here's the other one too. Is this article here, which I'll put up for you if you want. You have little clips to see. UK police face allegations of being overzealous at coronavirus social distancing, called ITV News. That's on YouTube. Delingpole and Peter Hitchens' special is a talk that they had amongst themselves. Interesting to listen to the points of view that they have. Then there's Lord Sumption, who destroys the shameful UK police force and calls out fear-mongering media on the BBC. As he said, well, that's what it is. It's that the whole panic has been massively authorised because the media is not independent. It really isn't. It's an arm of real government, the ones who really own above politics. And they stampeded the whole world on cue. And it literally was like a switch getting moved. And they suddenly went into action all at the same time together. Way overboard beyond any conspiracy stories that were before them. Way overboard. They're all going to die. So anyway, so Lord Sumption gives a good little talk on it. And then Trevor Kavanagh, hysteria forced the UK into lockdown. It's just total hysteria, of course, isn't it? This is quite an interesting one. The journalists are key workers too, it says. And the guy, you'll see the guy talking to the cops, stop to talk to him in these big vans that they've got in Britain. Are you out for your one short walk, sir? That's how it was worded. Your one short walk. My God, Our wardens, our new wardens, And David Wermoff on COVID-19 and globalism. And Australia should take back the land from China as damages. That was someone who was talking about it too, blaming China for it. And Farage is quite interesting, say no to house arrest. As a YouTuber. And you have become the thought police. UK police chief questioned over recording of hate incidents. These are not crimes, by the way. A thought is not a crime. But it is now, apparently. For life, it's on your record. What a world, what a disgusting system's been brought in. And often because certain factions of society that are well organized and literally are, even the big foundations who live on billions and trillions a year, some of them, big foundations, literally, have got their hands out for our tax money too. There's big money in these for hate or anything else. There's no money in love apparently, but unless you're running some kind of sex orgy place, which apparently is quite legal now for swingers. But for hate, it's big money, because then you can go after. There's people, even nations go after people because it's a business. It gives you an advantage if you're in charge of what folk can say or think. And unfortunately, that's the world we live in now, when the average person is given no real power at all or rights at all, and whatever you did have, you're losing it very, very quickly. Now, I think I've talked about enough here, and I hope I haven't bored you. But I'll put all these links up for people who want to work their way through them. I'm sure you've all come to the same conclusions anyway, because most folk are pretty well awake that listen to me at least, and we know it's not pleasant. It's not meant to be suddenly over and done with either. And even if they bring it, if they start changing it and towards the fall, and to giving it less restrictions, it's been a massive exercise regardless. And then they'll know how to do it more. And you've been trained as well to go into it more quickly the next time they bring it out, which might only be before the winter hits. Well, it might come back in the late fall, or the spring, and it's quite something. Because the incredible data from the countless thousands of organizations right now are getting paid to monitor and all this stuff and analyze it all. It's all to control you all the more perfectly, unfortunately. And big money out there by all these. See, since you don't make any real tangible goods anymore, all these organizations have got their hands out, and it's all paid by our tax money to study us minutely, because we are the business. The only business that's left really is us. So look after yourselves, folks, and don't panic about things. Don't panic. And you can only do what you can best do to keep yourselves as safe as possible and away from this problem. And hopefully you have got other folk who will help you out. If you get totally housebound completely and you can't get to whatever, and folk can get food to you, whatever it happens to be, because the government, especially in Canada, they can see has done nothing at all to help the average person, especially those outside the cities, and those are probably more vulnerable, in fact. There's nothing set up to check on them and see if they're okay, as far as I know, unless they belong to certain organizations. See, if you're just an ordinary person today, you don't belong to any special group, you're a nobody. I said that would happen 25 years ago. You're nobody. You'd have to belong to a group to get any rights at all, or any notice. And that's happened, of course, as we all know. Sad but true. Now, just before I finish, I should mention again, because we have very short memories these days, don't we? And including me, mind you, because I generally, so many talks, sometimes I do 50 talks without mentioning donations and so on. I just forget all about it as I get carried away with the chat. So remember, you can order the books and so cutting through matrix.com. They'll take a while because the printers are all shut down too, but they'll eventually get to you. Discs still go out there, mind you. And you can just donate to me by using PayPal or send checks, for instance, or money orders, if you can get money orders. There's different ways to do it, but you can find out how at cuttingthroughthematrix.com. How to order and how to donate is all there. And plus too, just email me, remember, as well, if you want to know whether ways you can pay me or get cash to me, because cash is acceptable too, naturally, and so are checks, as I've said before. So don't forget, you can send a few pennies my way to cover my costs as well. Now back to the talk again. So take care of yourselves, and I say don't panic, and I really check the mail that comes in. So much mail comes in, email, and I know the people too. You get to know people, and And I do my best to get back to them if I can. But the one thing I never lose sight on is the fact that they're real people, you know. Very important, that. And it makes it all the more worthwhile just knowing the real people are getting in touch with me, I get in touch with them, and you get to know them as really fully as people. You know. That's really a rewarding thing. So for myself, Alan Watt from Ontario, Canada, it's good night. May your God or your gods go with you.